All right, hello and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker, and today I have a special treat for my Shroud fans. I have an unexpected show. It was a show that Teddy pitched to me yesterday, and after a bit of back and forth, I thought it was a great show idea. So basically, this is going to be Teddi Pappas, the Shroud Shrink. But just before we get into today's topic and that sort of thing, I just want to say, yeah, how have you been? What have you been up to? I know you're quite busy on your end.
No, just it's just nonstop. But working on a conference paper. I had a hematidrosis paper in the works. I had to put that off to the side though, because the conference is coming up, and so it's just
What's the conference paper topic on?
it is on how the Shroud of Turin is the ultimate evidence that shows the divinity of Jesus of Nazareth. So,
Interesting. Shows the divinity. So mo most people kind of hone in on it's the death and resurrection, but you're kind of saying there's an argument from the Shroud for the divinity. And I guess I won't probe further. We'll have to
well,
wait.
I mean, you can't. I mean, it has to do with, you know, is Jesus who he said he is, and was what he was saying true or not? And if he's divine, and that, that means that the things that are in the Bible are true. And looking at
Gotcha.
the evidences on the shroud and how all that plays in. But yes, of course, the resurrection is that's the key piece of evidence. So
Awesome. All
I'll
right.
be that it won't be it actually is not going to be as heavy on the science as which people might be surprised. They might be expecting that coming from me. Um, it's more about me, being in my area of expertise as a lawyer, building the argument and establishing the foundation. Because a lot of people like to make assumptions. Lawyers, you can't do that. You know, that's unacceptable. We don't assume, like the people in the Jesus seminar that did that, they made assumptions. Lots of
Mhm.
people make assumptions. Lots of people in science make assumptions. They don't like to talk about it, but they do. And so, lawyers, we do not make assumptions about anything. Why don't we do that? Because there's going to be an opponent on the other side drawing attention and shining a spotlight on any assumptions we make. And that's where they're going to have their gotcha moment. It's like, aha, you assumed this. So, all of the rest of your argument is garbage. So I'm going to be um, getting into the first of all, I mean, everything starts with how do we know that there really was a Jesus of Nazareth historically? And so I'm going to start from the very beginning and build it on up. And um, there are going to be, especially with the science things, you just can't get into all of those details, but I will point the highlights um, and where the details can be gotten. And I do believe that a lot of the details, specifically the roadmap for it, are in my rigor mortis paper that I had published earlier this year. I give specific special qualities to the shroud and where people can find um, the peer-reviewed, published evidence from top-notch journals like Applied Optics, um, and where they can find that information, and where they can also explore beyond just the surface level information. People frequently just hear the headlines. But
Mhm.
if you just hear the headlines, it's easy to somebody to debunk it or try to lampoon it, and then you don't, and then you're caught like a deer in the headlights, not
Sure.
knowing what to do with that.
Surely the skeptics like the rabid atheists, they go way deep into the
All
shroud.
right. So
They
yeah, I mean, so it's important for people to know beyond just the headlines. Just like with Christianity, you have so many children, they're brought up in a Christian household, and they um, think of themselves as Christians, but then they go off to college and then they get some smart, savvy, clever atheists that start sowing doubts in their minds. And because they don't have deep roots to their understanding and their basis for believing in Christianity, it's easily undermined. But when somebody has that deeper understanding of the evidence, and you have your people that, okay, my mom and dad told me, God is real, so I believe it. Those people can so easily be shaken off their faith and belief in God. Then you have the people who have more Bible study. Okay, their faith is a little bit firmer. Then you have people that understand many apologetical arguments, and they're going to be much, much stronger. Then it's not just blind faith.
Hmm.
Then there's something more to it, more substance.
Yeah.
But
So
even that, and these wonderful apologists, and I'm a very big fan of apologetics, but most of them are missing the most important evidence, and that's the Holy Shroud, because that's not just the cherry on top. It's it's the foundation. Some people call it the fifth gospel. I consider it the first. So, anyway,
interesting. Okay. All right. So yeah, obviously for today's topic, Teddy had seen the show that I just posted up yesterday on Satan-induced supernatural skeptical stupidity syndrome, part one. Look out for part two soon. But so Teddy, yeah, okay. And there was something in there in particular which prompted Teddy to want to do this topic where she investigates me. But just very briefly, before I play that clip and get into today's topic, what were your thoughts in general, very briefly, about that video? The
yeah, I thought it was great. I thought you did I like how you just went point by point with Hugh's attacks, and you gave wonderful, wonderful explanations. I especially, and I've only so far I've only heard half of it. I've not had a chance to listen to the whole show, but with the first half that I listened to, especially the Bayesian
Hmm,
uh, explanations that you gave, I thought that was really incredible. Now, here's something that I harp on to even our Shroud folks, our advocates. Many of them don't want to take the time or bother or give attention to what skeptics write and doing it on their platform and all that. But we know that uh, a lot of people who are atheists, agnostics, anti-theists, anti-shroudists, um, they know exactly where to go to get their information. And if they don't know, they'll find out really soon from a quick internet search. And they're going to go straight to Dan Porter's website, to Hugh Ferry's website, and they're given a roadmap as to how to uh,
they're
attempt
talking points.
to lampoon our evidence. And my concern has always been that if we do not give responses, and we don't always have time. I mean, it's a real thing. There are only so many hours in the day, and we're working on things. And I mean, I've ended up falling behind on my hematidrosis paper, trying to deal with the flurry of um, posts and stuff by Hugh and Dan. But those things are going to be on the internet for who knows how long. And they'll probably survive beyond their deaths.
Mm.
Nothing ever seems to leave the internet. And
Especially with the
so,
way back. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so it's important that we have responses there, and there aren't enough of us out there taking the time to do it. They think, oh, well, I've written a paper. It's like, well, okay, that's great, but not everybody. A lot of people are just first finding out about the shroud, and they're not sciencey people, or they're not deeply invested or deeply curious about it, which is weird to me. How do you not be curious about something like that? But anyway.
Talk to my brother, please.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, what could possibly, I mean, is a 15-year-old, when I first heard about it, I was like, wow. I mean, it captured my imagination and just my curiosity. And I just wanted to learn more, and I did. And so, but my point is that it's important for people to, to take action. Um, and so anyway, I really appreciated that, you're one of the people out there, one of the advocates, one of the defenders of, because it's not just about defending a cloth. That cloth, if you understand what it is, that cloth has the blood of Jesus from his crucifixion. That's not just a cloth. And it has the face of our Savior on it. And so we can actually have a really good idea of what Jesus looked like. And that's something that's so special to see, because imagine like you have a pen pal and you never see their face. There's there's something almost not real about them, even though you might communicate every day. There's just something mm, otherworldly, almost imaginary, almost pretend. It's like
Disconnect.
they're there, but they're not there.
Uh,
There's a sense of unreality. Is that even a word?
it is now.
Okay, it is now. Um, and so, you know, through looking at someone's face, there's a connection. I mean, you think about uh, a baby and a mother, and when they're gazing into each other's eyes. And that's something that we can do when we look at the holy face on the shroud. And there's something really incredible and deep about being able to really contemplate and to look at that glorious face. So it's not just a cloth. It's not just a cloth. And so we need to defend it. If somebody would defend uh, people telling lies about their child or about their mama, and if they might get furious and angry and maybe even, I'm not advocating violence, but some people will get violent. They'll at least punch somebody out. A lot of men, you talk about their mama, you might get punched out. Um, and so if we'll do that for our child or our parent or our mama, won't we do that for a cloth that has our Savior's face and blood on it? And that has the power, and it has done that with so many people. It has the power to bring many atheists to Christ for their salvation. So I disagree so hotly with these people that just sit on their hands, or they think that it's all about being meek and mild and this and that. They've got this odd sense of who Jesus is and what I mean, Jesus, he'd rebuke people
Right.
when they needed a good rebuking. I mean, look at what he did in the temple with the money changers. Um, Jesus talked about hell, not all this universalism baloney.
Yeah.
There's hell, and there are people that are going there, and they're even going to be, as is instructed with the parable of the sheep and the goats. There are going to be Christians who love God, who worship God, who are going to be going to hell. And so, we've all got to be so careful. It's not just Jesus died for our sins. No, apparently there is more to it. Otherwise, there would not be the parable of the sheep and the goats. So,
Yeah,
um,
I think it's you raise an important point, and I think it's so important. A lot of times Christians and stuff like that, such as Danny Boy and stuff like Dan Porter and stuff like that, they focus in on certain aspects that they like. They pick and choose the aspects. And look, on our end, we've got to be right. Like I kind of, get sick and tired of always having to remind people about, well, yeah, Jesus called people a brood of vipers and all this stuff, and that's true as well. We have to accept God in his fullness. Do we actually love God for who he was? And that includes everything. So yes, that includes the meekness, the loving stuff. I have a lot to learn. We all have a lot to learn from, his example on that front and turning the other cheek and on that front. But the lesson I get from that is that there are different ways to respond to different types of people. Jesus dealt with people on a one-on-one basis, and he knew what was the best approach for any given situation, right? So he would know, okay, if someone's asking me sincere questions, I'll give them a straight answer, for example. Or if somebody's, just giving me a testing question, oh, let me answer you with a question to your question and stuff. So there's different techniques, and they're all valid in the service of Christ. And yeah, that's what I just don't like when Christians like Dan and some of the others on his blog, I tolerate that. Okay, great. Even if you're a universe, I think that's wrong, but I can tolerate you and respect you and hear my reasons why I think that's wrong, and stuff. But I can agree with you that Jesus was loving. But then on the other hand, when I say, but Jesus also taught about he's just as well, and there is a heaven and hell. So no, 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 you can't talk about that on my blog.
God can be a wrathful God too. I mean, people forget about that. And
Exactly.
you
Like,
know,
yeah,
really, and he created hell. He didn't have to create hell, but he did create hell.
yeah,
And
it's
people
both.
don't put themselves in hell because nobody chooses to be in an eternal lake of fire. Nobody picks that. They'd pick something else. Um,
Well, David Johnson,
yeah,
he
I
chose
mean,
on a
yeah,
hill, but
yeah, he
but but all right. So yeah, fair enough. So I think that's good. That's the main point. I like your point about look, it's both and we got to follow Jesus' full example there. But as much as you loved my show, there was a point where I kind of mentioned that I disagreed with you, and that prompted your what I think is a very unique and great idea for a show. Although I'm not really the type that likes therapy sessions and stuff. That's what we're doing. So let me just play that short clip just to show the audience what prompted Teddy's idea here. And is that showing up?
it is.
Okay. So, in terms of the beyond reasonable doubt, this does look to be primarily aimed at Teddi Pappas because this is her famous claim publicly everywhere. She said this, so I'm not outing her or anything like that. But she makes this claim all the time that the shroud evidence is proven beyond all reasonable doubt. And in terms of myself, I would also say Hugh has also scolded me for using the word proof or proven with respect to the shroud evidence at times. Although I agree with Hugh Ferry and I disagree with Teddi, I don't think the evidence is sufficiently strong to say it's proven beyond all reasonable doubt, which I place at an arbitrary standard of 95.01% proven or higher. I think the evidence is clearly less than that. So I disagree with Teddy, and I agree with you. I think I'm a reasonable person, and I have reasonable doubts about the shroud. All right, so that's what kind of kicked it off. Where yep, Teddy has some. Teddy reached out and said, "Hey, guess what, Dale? If I could just be your shroud shrink,
Yeah,
she says she can get me to believing the shroud is proven beyond all reasonable
well,
doubt."
I'm going to try. I'm going to try. I don't know that I can. I don't know that I can because that's up to you. And
Yeah.
but I'm going to I what I wanted to do was uh I mean to basically just have a discussion to see and to probe what it is that causes you to not have confidence beyond a reasonable doubt because
Yeah.
I think it's there in spades. I mean, I would stake my life on it. I would.
Okay.
That's how
So,
strongly I believe in it. And it's not just, and one could even sit, let's just
well, hang on. I just want to, just for the sake of the audience, and then I'll hand it. The reins of the show are going to be all on Teddy. This is her show. It's going to be a very interesting thing because I'm going to be almost playing the role of a on the Shroud skeptic side a bit, which is a bit weird, even though I'm not a skeptic or something. But yeah, Teddy asked me to like be as open as possible. Hey, I want Teddy to succeed. I want as a high degree of war. I want to be 100%. The heck with beyond reasonable doubt. Is that it, Teddy? No, get me to 100% if you can. So my job is to kind of follow your lead and be as open and honest and sincere with where I'm coming from. And yeah, let's see what you got. So Teddy, the reins are yours.
thank you. All right. So Dale, you have done I don't know how many Shroud Wars episodes at this point. You have written a book about the Shroud. You've had lots of discussions with Gary Habermas, with me, with many other uh, people who have studied the Shroud for many years. So I know that the arguments as well as anybody does. Um, what what is it that now? In all fairness, I seem to recall you telling me that when you arrived at your percent, what was your percentage again?
Yeah,
That
so
you,
I looked that up. So when I was on with Gary, I was going based off memory. I said it was 72.53%. And
huh?
just for this show, I went and looked it up, and I'm going to share my screen so people can see that I'm not lying. So I
Okay.
was 2% off. It looks like at the time of my conversion in 2018,
Yeah.
it's 70.15% was the percentage. So I got that wrong when I told Gary 72.53. I don't know where that came from, but yeah, 70.15% at the time of my conversion. That's where I was.
Well, that's not very high. I mean, that's certainly over 50% mark for a preponderance of the evidence, but that's not particularly high. And and again, okay, I'm gonna be a head shrinker here today,
Crowd
an
shrink.
unlicensed one. So, it's
Crowd shrink. We got to get that to be a
yeah. So, uh, but okay, so that was in 2018,
Mhm.
right? Now, when did you start doing your Shroud Wars programs? That was around 2018, right?
It was, yeah, I started doing solo shows in around October 2018. And then I had my first guest show with Barry Schwartz and David Johnson and Andrew Knight in November of 2018. And from there, I've been
Okay.
doing it ever since.
Gotcha. Okay, so and I discovered the Skeptics and Seekers show. It was around October,
In our
September
second season, yeah.
of 2019. So and back then it was extremely difficult. Y'all, I think yours was about the only show or series of shows with Shroud debates that were on the internet, if you can believe that. I mean, because that's how I discovered y'all. I was I was thinking about writing either a book or a paper, and I was thinking, well, let's see what if I could find a debate on Shroud matters, and let's see what the best arguments against it are, and then I'm going to see if I can tackle them. So that was why I was interested in finding a Shroud debate. And I found yours, but I don't recall finding anybody else's. But I also found uh, Dan Porter's website and where there's, written debates. And that's why I keep telling people that minimize that. Oh, how many people go to his site? It's like, I don't know, but I just did some quick internet searching and I immediately came to his site,
And he was
especially when
he was
when
defunct at that back in 2019. He was defunct, right? Like he wasn't doing his blog.
that didn't matter, but I still found his, you Google certain topics and you will immediately find high up on the search results things from his website. So these people sorry, I got an allergy thing, my nose. These people that try to act like, oh, how many people are going? It's like, well, somebody who's looking for Shroud stuff, they're not going to usually just stick to shroud.com. They're frequently going to just do a blanket search on Google, and they will very likely come across Dan's stuff. So when Dan posts stuff, it's really good for us to help provide answers to give a balanced view, because it's kind of like when the state prosecutes a defendant and they take their case to the grand jury, and before the grand jury it's only the state that presents evidence. So, I mean, that's why they can practically indict a ham sandwich, because the people on the grand jury are not hearing the other side. They're not hearing challenges to what the state's evidence is. And that's, people are interested in seeing the
Yeah.
back and forth as opposed to just propaganda. I mean, and when I say propaganda, I mean that has a negative connotation. Propaganda can be 100% true. So I'm not trying to say that it's not true, like when people just do stuff that's pro authenticity.
You need both sides to
Yeah,
complete.
but
She
it's
barely
yeah,
has that cop.
it's good to see the interplay. And the other reason why it's so good to see the interplay, the arguments going back and forth, is that you then become aware of what the other side's going to argue, and you can then prepare for it. So if you're talking to people and somebody brings up a question, well, you already know how to handle it because you've been exposed to all of the different challenges, and you're not going to be caught like a deer in the headlights like so many people are. And I've told people, it's like, for example, there are a number of pieces of classic Shroud evidence that I don't use in my arguments. And the reason why is because I saw challenges made to it by, people like Hugh and Dan and some others. And I never saw a response. And that's just been, those tend to be lesser pieces of evidence, or that I consider, like the pollen evidence. That to me is not a critical, it's an important and interesting component, but I don't consider it to be a critical component. And I don't need it for my arguments, and I haven't used it ever. Um, and although I find it fascinating, but the reason why, it was early on, I started hearing criticisms about it, and I didn't know what the response would be. And
Well,
again, I wasn't.
pay attention to Shroud Wars. You might hear my responses to some of those
Oh,
things.
good, good. And actually, there is a book. I'll see if I can get it. there is a Shroud scholar, I'm probably going to get his name wrong. I think it's Pierre de Reed, Reedmaten,
Okay.
something like that. It's French, from France. And he has uh, written, I think it's like a 70-page paper. I think it might be in, was it in the BSTS newsletter? I don't know. I'll try to check on that. But he gave a great response to a lot of the skeptics' attacks on the Max Fry pollen evidence. And I have seen just some quick, like a summary of it, and oh, it's really great stuff I'd never heard before. I was like, wow, this is fantastic. And so I would, but before I started using it, and again, right now I don't have the need to use it. I've got some bigger fish to fry with more of the chemistry and stuff like that. But it'll be coming.
So what's your like what are you getting at with respect to me? Like are you saying that I'm so low because I'm basing it on like non-critical evidences or like what are you
What
saying?
I'm just saying is that the importance of giving a response to attacks, because I never saw good responses to the attacks that Hugh and Dan made on the pollen evidence. It caused me to not be confident about it anymore. And if I'm not confident about a piece of evidence, I'm not going to use it because
Mhm.
uh, I have no interest in making arguments that can be defeated, you know.
I agree
Just
with that. Like my part
I
of
have no interest in that.
part of my approach when I was studying the shroud again as an unbeliever and stuff, I be part of being a real seeker is you need to do your best, right? Because you're not aware of what you're not aware of and stuff like that, but do
Right.
your best. And I believe the Holy Spirit will guide any true, real seekers doing their best to seek out the best of each side of a given argument. And until you've heard both sides or all sides, if it's a multi-sided thing, then you don't have an intellectual right to your opinion. I don't think it's, again, unless you can only find one side or something. In that case, and you've done your best, then that's on God. But
Mhm.
it's readily the skeptic side is readily available, as was the pro-shroud side when I was doing my studies. So I was responsible to look at them and stuff like that. So and put that together before you adjudicate on it, kind of thing, right? Because then you have that informed opinion. So that was
And
kind
I
of cool for
say
me.
that but that can cause endless, well, I was about to say endless going down rabbit holes, which I'm infamous for. But but one can get to the point where it's like, do I have to become a scholar in every single religion that exists before I can formulate an opinion? And I think the answer is definitely no. There, there comes a point where if you find solid enough evidence in something, and you've done some exploration and you find solid enough evidence, I mean, you can have an opinion, and
Yeah.
you
Nothing
know
I said contradicted that, right? I made an
and,
opinion and I'm not a scholar.
and
So
keep an open mind to challenges. And when you hear challenges, um, see if you can beat them or not. Because, for example, you have people who are Jewish, people who are Muslim, people who are Mormons, people who are Hindus. Well, they all have a very strong confidence in the truth of their belief system, their religious belief system as well, just as we do. And so it's important to, especially with the religions that have been around a lot longer as opposed to, fly by night things that just pop up. But, there is something to say about if a particular religion or a particular idea can stand the test of time and continue, because uh, a lot of junk generally just doesn't, I mean, it can, but typically it's usually the more powerful things that can
Okay,
transcend.
fair. I think we're on the same page on that front. So fair enough.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah,
let's get to you, Dale. So what is it? Because 70% now, okay, in all fairness, that was in 2018 before you started doing all of these shows.
mhm.
But you still keep quoting that. So maybe that's not a good idea to keep quoting a percentage that was done before you had the exposure of all of these years now of hearing different attempts at replicating the shroud. You yourself on with your shows have um, gotten into why they are faulty. We've talked about like the Garla Skelly and Hughes attempts, is two different attempts, and Craig and Breesy and all these other people. So you've seen how these all fail, as well as I do, all of the particularly interesting qualities of the shroud, the body image, and the blood. And it's not just about, and here's perhaps too a problem with using
Well,
the
let's do one. Let's do one at a time then. So you raised, okay, so your first point is maybe, so firstly, I will agree with you. Obviously, now I've learned a bunch of stuff I did not know on May 5th, 2018, when I finally converted to Christ. So I know for a fact that my percentage is higher than the 70% at the time of
good.
the conversion. But the reason why do I keep quoting the 70%, at least for now? When I finish my book, I will no longer quote that because I will have a now recalculated total, and that will be my total. But the reason I don't just say, oh, well, and make up a number like, oh, I'm 80% now, or I'm 85% now, whatever I'm feeling at the moment, is oh, are you still there, Teddy?
Yeah.
Okay, you went off. So something that people might be misunderstanding, and it's partly my fault and partly Gary Habermas's fault, because Gary would always ask me like, "Oh, he makes it seem like it's just a feeling, my numbers. Like, oh, how are you feeling today on the Shroud? And Gary would always ask me when we would meet. He would say like, "How are you feeling now?" And I would answer him just based on feelings, like, oh, I feel this or that. And that's not how my numbers actually work. The only numbers that are official, I did a series of 3 rounds of investigation for every piece of evidence for the world religions I studied over a period of 8 years. So that this number, this 70.15%, is representing my final total after the third round of investigation.
Mhm.
And this number represents my degree of warrant. It's not representing just loosey goosey, oh, how am I feeling on this day versus another day. It doesn't change from thing to thing. This is my degree of warrant, having seriously over the course of I think 2 years, it took me to finish that 3 rounds, or a year and a half for that third round on the Shroud. That's the number I got. So it's far more objective and serious than it may seem. And admittedly, I take the blame for this because I would answer Gary and humor him when he would say, "What are you feeling today?" and stuff like that. So the reason I know for a fact my numbers have gone up, but I haven't done the serious work that I'm working on now in my book to
Mhm.
recalculate it. So I could tell you, well, I guess I feel maybe between 80 and 85%, but it's meaningless. Like it's just feelings. And
Don't feel, forget feelings. I'm not into feelings,
Well,
Think,
I no,
think.
but you
What do you
can't
think?
put. Okay, well, here's why I'm very against doing that because it's a garbage in, garbage out level two problem. This is
Hmm.
what everybody else does. This is why I think my way is superior using Bayes' theorem, and
Right.
using because I break up all of the individual components of the argument, right? I don't just jumble everything together in my head and
And
go,
see, here's that. Okay, that's one of the problems that I perceive
okay.
with your approach. You try to do it very ad hoc-ish.
Ad hoc-ish.
Well, I
Okay.
mean, just like where you're looking at each thing, but to me, it's about the body of evidence. Instead of looking at percentages, no, I mean, what could be more important than what a jury does in terms of trying to figure out if they're going to deprive a human made in the image of God of their freedom or even of their life? And we don't do Bayesian analyses on the evidence. It's listening to the the body, the corpus of the case that the prosecution makes, what the defense attorney has to say, the way the defense attorney will attack the evidence that
But that's
that
Bayes. That's Bayes' theorem. They're just unconscious of the fact
nobody.
that they're doing it.
Yeah, but nobody's sitting down. Okay, well, I give this a 75%. I give this one a 33%. It,
But that's my point is that's where it's not stupid. You can be rational doing that, but it's less
I'm not saying it's
rational
stupid.
than
I'm not saying
no
it's
no
stupid
no
or
no. I'm
irrational what
saying
you're. I'm
okay.
just saying that when you are uh trying to dissect each little piece of evidence and then put the numbers together, I don't think I think you have to just always keep it looking at all as a whole. And and what I do is with shaky evidence or evidence, well, and let me
Let
rephrase that.
let
That's a bad choice of words, shaky evidence. Evidence that I might not know enough about so that my knowledge of it might be shaky, or maybe it is shaky evidence. It just depends. But if there's something that I'm not real sure of or is just kind of questionable, I'm gonna put that off to the side. I don't necessarily dismiss it because sometimes that can help, if the scales are really close, that can help tip the scale. Because if you've got too many things going in one direction for authenticity and you don't have reasonable things going in the other way, then that's how you get to where there are no reasonable doubts. I would urge you as your shrink to to instead of focusing on that other stuff, focus on, well, where is your reasonable doubt? Please tell me what evidence you find gives you reasonable doubt. Because apparently, okay, it sounds like you're still, or I don't know, do you think that you were possibly, I don't think you are, or I don't know. Do you think you might now be at a beyond the reasonable doubt stage? Because it sounds like you were denying that you were.
I would definitely deny. I definitely still have reasonable doubt. But again, I haven't done the calculations, but I would be extremely surprised if it came out above 95.01% or higher as the
Huh.
cumulative total.
All right. Well, your shrink here is going to coin a phrase. And we'll see if you are engaged in this, because I think you might be. You've heard of magical thinking?
Yes, all the time.
Hey, magical doubting.
Okay.
How about them apples?
Okay.
I
So
think a lot of people are engaged in magical doubting
I would
regarding the
agree.
shroud evidence in the sense that they don't have a basis for their doubt, not a sound one.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, if you've got a sound, well, tell me where, what's your evidence for doubting the shroud's authenticity? Let's start with there. What do you think is good evidence,
Well,
for
let me.
doubt, reasonably doubt?
Okay, so I think if it's okay, again, I gave you the reins. I think what might be helpful, and you can say no, just answer my question directly if you want, but on what basis? Because believe it or not, I didn't use Bayes' theorem for the shroud in particular. So that's kind of a moot point. I did use probabilities, but I have a set of necessary and sufficient criteria by which I judge any and all miracle claims, whatever it is, for any
Uh-huh.
religion. And that went through that's what my shroud book is, right? So the first step. So first of all, do you think that might be helpful if I go through what my criteria are and see if you agree with the criteria or not? And then I can say where the doubts are creeping up with respect to those criteria.
As your shrink, I'm going to redirect you
Okay.
to you know, give me the details. What is there? I mean, it can't be a painting. It's not, there's no reasonable evidence that it could have been formed by a natural body either. There have been plenty of bodies that have been wrapped in burial shrouds. The Jews, the Muslims wrap their dead
Mhm.
in burial shrouds. And now I don't know, I have no idea whether, do you know whether the Muslims then
They still
unearth
do to this
bodies?
day.
But did the Muslims unearth the bodies and put the bones in an ossuary the way
No,
the
no, that was ancient Jewish practice. Yeah.
But we know with the Jews, it wasn't that they just put the corpse in a burial shroud, but in about a year or so, they would unearth, you know, the body and or it might not be in the earth, but they would get the body out of the shroud, take the bones, and put it in an ossuary. Now, they're now seeing a linen cloth that wrapped the body, yet we have zero evidence that any of these burial shrouds, under a multitude of different conditions in terms of environmental ones, but particularly in Israel,
Mhm.
um, we have not a single one, or even in wartime where they're transporting people uh, that are
Okay.
dying. There's just zero evidence that a natural body can create the type of body image that we see on the shroud. So for somebody to claim and to stick with, oh, well, there could have been a natural way of doing it. Well, that's magical doubting, according to your shrink.
Okay. Okay. So here's how I can help. So with respect to my criteria, I think you'll find this helpful to understand my mindset then and now. Okay. So I have a total of three different ways that I think you can argue a given event, like the formation of the shroud images, is miraculous or is what I say extraordinary, right? So the first is a mechanistic type argument, right? That's the way most pro-shroud guys go. The second, I think, is relating to what you're saying. It's a uniqueness. All right, the event is unique, But not just that it's unique despite a sufficient opportunity for duplication in a naturalistic context. So, and in terms of what are opportunities with respect to the shroud, there are natural opportunities. That's the argument you're making. Millions of people buried in shrouds, and we don't find any other shroud with images. There's also artificial opportunities, field and lab experiments, right? So you make this argument about the shroud is unique despite a proven sufficient natural opportunity of all the millions of people, no other things. I have reasonable doubts with this argument, right? Both in 2018 and even now. So, what are my reasonable doubts? First of all, it's absolutely true that the shroud is unique. Of all everyone who's been buried in a burial shroud, no, we haven't found anybody else with images like this. But the problem is, how many of burial shrouds have we actually checked? We haven't really been, apart from maybe mummy wrappings and stuff, we don't check or we don't dig people up to.
When they're taking the bones out for the ossuary, a zillion Jews have checked as they unearth or as they remove the bones from the shroud, from burial shrouds to take the bones to put them in. So innumerable people have had the opportunity to see
Okay.
burial shrouds, probably linen,
Mhm.
that contained a dead, decomposing body. That's why I think Ray Rogers is way off with his theories
So,
on that.
so do I.
And yet there are no images because I think that if a Jew saw an image, they would be like, wow, we'd know about it. We would know
Okay.
about
So here's reasonable doubts with that counter. And
it.
again, I'm not trying to be, I'm just being honest as to why it
No,
doesn't
that's what
help
this
me.
is for.
So
That's what our therapy session is for.
cool. So I would counter, like from the shred skeptical position, that yeah, but those, first of all, we don't have any proof that there weren't images, first of all, because we don't have someone saying, hey, I took the burial shrouds off and there was no images. So it's an argument from silence.
Blah, blah, blah,
So
blah, blah.
wait. Number
Is
two,
that reasonable
number
that out of all of the burial shrouds, all of the Jews, countless Jews who have been buried, and then in about a year they get unburied, so that countless people have seen grungy burial shrouds that have decomposing blah all over it. And not a single report, that is not a reasonable doubt. That's not a reasonable
I,
doubt.
I think it is for two reasons, right? So
Reasonable.
so
You're
number
giving me
one, so number one, we have to be able to calibrate as historians. Dr. Lydia McGrew, you love her. She's
I
done
do.
work on this, on how we are to prove our expectations about the reports of ancients. And ancients don't report things we would expect. Like, how could you not say that? This was so obvious, and they don't report it all the time. This is a fact. So I think it's hard for you. I haven't seen you establish an expectation. But
And ancient
the
things aren't.
second reason, the
How
second
long?
reason, and I'll shut up after that, and I'll let you go on. But this is also important because you're assuming, look, the shroud man was removed within days. The Jewish custom was they waited a full year for full decomposition, full rotting. So we wouldn't even expect there to be shroud images at that time. It would be like a massive stain or something like that. And yeah, they wouldn't mention that because it's just some icky brown stain that's not in a recognizable form at all. After a year's time, it wouldn't be comparable to the shroud images, and that that's it for my reasonable doubts on this specific argument from natural
You're
uniqueness.
having to accept the narrative of the Gospels to even go with that. You're having to accept that on the third day that there was an empty tomb, and I
No,
mean,
I think the
I mean,
shroud evidence proves that there's no
you're going
decomposition.
back to the shroud, but so let's take. But again, when did the Jews? Or do they still? I mean, I think they. I don't know. For example, my mother grew up in Greece. And she said that when she was a kid, because space is an issue, they don't have a bunch of land to bury everybody and keep them buried. That is still a thing to where somebody dies, they bury them, and in about a year or so, when they think that the body, has skeletonized, they will then unearth the body. And she was a kid and she was there at the cemetery with her mother, and she saw a body being brought up, and she was just traumatized by that and remembers that. But so even, at her age they were doing that. And so I don't know if Jews are still typically
Oh, the bone boxes? No, they don't.
they don't. And
It's-
but I mean, I don't know, they might. I mean, maybe not in America. I don't know. I'm not sure. But I mean, I know that my mom is a kid. So, I mean, she's an older lady, but she's not that old. I mean, we're not talking, it wasn't that long ago that even in Greece, they were still unearthing bodies to put them in bone boxes because they didn't have the space for, tons of, you know,
And I'm just looking it up.
dirt.
No, modern Jewish burial practices generally do not include the use of ossuaries. Uh,
Okay. Well,
just
when did they stop?
back in ancient times, is from what I understood.
I bet you long. I bet you it's not as long ago as that.
Did not persist among Jews past the Second Temple. So after 70 AD, it stopped. And I remember that coming up in my research with Mark Neer as well. This is
Mhm.
something in favor of the Shroud of Turin's authenticity. So after the Second Temple was destroyed, the practice stopped.
Okay, well, with Greeks, I'm sure that I don't know what they put the body in. I don't know in Greece, like, did they put them in a shroud? My guess is probably just their own clothing. I don't know. So
Okay,
maybe
so
that,
Greeks have bone boxes. You guys
yeah.
wait a
I don't
year,
know if they
dig up.
still do, but when my mom was a kid, that was the big pride. And actually, when I went to Greece years
So
ago, went to the cemetery, and she was showing me some of these ossuaries. I
okay.
don't know what they call them an ossuary, but whatever the Greeks
So
call
what
them.
what has been reported? And again, you guys wait a full year, like the Jews did, the
At
ancient
least, at
Jews did.
least about, I mean, I don't know if there is a set time, but I think that the general amount of time for bodies to skeletonize is about a year. And so they'll wait about that long to be sure that, you know.
So what do they find then? Like you should know better. Like
So
what
it's
is
just
it just
bones. I mean,
brown? There's no staining and decomposition at all on the cloth, or
I don't know. I don't know whether the people are buried in their clothes or a shroud. If I had to get, I've never heard of Greeks using a shroud. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything. What do I know about stuff like that? Don't know. I haven't investigated it.
okay.
But I mean, I know that the Jews, still use those burial shrouds. Um, but if they're not unearthing the body, but there might still be, for example, certain parts of the world where they might have the problem like the Greeks do with not having a whole lot of land to just keep bodies permanently buried, because you need a lot of land to just constantly bury a body in like a coffin or something.
Mhm. Well,
Um,
the Mount of Olives is a huge issue because everybody wants to be buried there. Jews, Christians, things for when Jesus returns. So they are running out of room and they've had to take steps, but they are committed to burying everyone. But that's kind of the most famous example in the world of a very crowded cemetery dating from ancient times all the way to modern
hmm.
times and stuff like that. But
Oh, I didn't know about that.
okay,
Interesting.
okay, well, if you want to establish this argument, and get me convinced, maybe here's what I would suggest you research and try and find. So, number one, you can do a comparison with modern, if there are modern people that shroud themselves, and okay, you can find a comparison of you know, does it leave images behind or not? What's left behind when they take those bodies out and put the bones in an ossuary? And let's see what we got. Because so I haven't heard of any reports like that for comparison in the modern world. Or the second thing is, okay, with respect to the ancient Jews, like you said, so hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Jews within ancient times, at least for a couple hundred years during the late Second Temple period, had this practice. Let's see if you can you find any reports talking about what they found, or can you establish that we would if there were shroud images,
I'm
we would expect
sure guys like Nicolati would have already found that information if it existed.
it doesn't.
Believe me. And just think about the skeptics and the research they do. If that information existed, I promise you we'd know about it because there are people who are highly invested in debunking the shroud. And oh, and here's another idea.
Well,
So,
how do you
yeah,
establish the expectation? That's what I need. That if you want to convince me on this, how do we prove that we would expect ancient Jews to have mentioned what was the remnants left behind on the burial shrouds 1 year afterwards, either shroud images or brown stains.
body image, if they saw a body image, that'd be a pretty stunning thing that they would know that's kind of wild.
Okay.
Um,
What if it
it,
was a brown stain or something?
yeah, but we don't just have a brown stain on the shroud. That's my point. Nobody's seen a burial cloth that has what the shroud has on it. Now, let's take Okay, you make a fair point that at a year there's going to be a greater amount of decomposition. Well, I mean, it doesn't take a year. I mean, it's going to happen relatively quick.
Right.
Um,
Statistically, it's that way.
I mean, yeah, a little bit after the third day is when you start getting into the real putrefaction.
Right.
So, you made the point, well, okay, well, so what if the body isn't if it's there, 7 days, it's going to be a bigger mess on the shroud and you might not see the body image. Well, I don't know. I mean, I mean, I don't know that we're going to get an answer to that, but um, I'm not sure. Maybe it would be a bigger mess. Maybe you could still see a body image through the mess. But let's take wartime. Um, or not necessarily just wartime, but during catastrophic events where, like when there have been tsunamis that um, kill a bunch of people, earthquakes, and people don't have time to bury dead people. They might have some sort of cloth around them, or they might just be piled up somewhere, but you don't see there are no reports um of of images, and especially not images like we see. I mean, the Jospis mattress uh in England, that was probably the closest thing that we would have to the shroud. But it still fails. It's only superficially similar to. I mean, the man, from what I recall, he was I believe he was dying of cancer, and he had jaundice, so his bilirubin levels were up high, and that increases the porphyrin content in his urine, and he had urinated on the mattress, and the mattress was synthetic. And I'm trying to remember, they were saying, I think the nurses kind of cleaned it, but probably didn't clean. They probably put a fresh mattress, but not the mattress cover or something like that. And somehow the urine, the porphyrins in the urine, ended up creating a little bit of an image that was first very shocking to people. They were like, "Oh, is this like the Shroud?" And they had a Dr. Frederick Zegebe examining it, and he did a write-up about it on it's on shroud.com. If you look up Jospice mattress, Jospice, and it's quite fascinating. There's a I seem to recall that there was initial write-up written, an account by somebody that was perhaps interviewing the medical staff, or he got like a
Fred Zuckerby has written a paper on Shroud.com on it. So yeah.
yeah, but before Zegeby wrote his paper, there was a report done by either someone there at the hospital or someone trying to immediately memorialize what had happened
Mhm.
in that situation. And then Zegeby came along. So you've got at least two things I mean, does more of an analysis on it, but it's quite fascinating, but it still fails. And we see Garlus skeleton, we see all of these things. So I am just still gonna harp on where is there? I mean, it's not reasonable doubt to just say, well, there just could be something. That's not reasonable doubt. That's magical doubt. Man, I love that
Well,
expression. Isn't that?
okay. Well, here's the way I see it, right? So I think you as a lawyer, based on what you said in the beginning, and me as a proper logician, we would say the person making the claim has the burden of proof. Whoever makes a positive claim has the burden of proof, right? So in this case, the way I see it is we are claiming, hey, the shroud images are miraculous. How do we know? Well, our reason in this case, and there's other reasons, right? But that we're talking about here is that, well, it is unique despite a sufficient natural opportunity for duplication. And what I need, regardless of the Jospis stuff like this, is in order to tell, is it unique and did it actually have a sufficient opportunity? We would need an analogous comparison, right? So we would need some way to establish that, yeah, people saw burial shrouds within 3 days after it was buried, and they didn't have images. That's what we've got to prove, right? On a balance of probabilities, whatever we.
And perhaps during wartime, or like I said, with these
Mhm.
natural disasters, I'm sure there were plenty of bodies that couldn't be buried, but maybe people wrapped them up. There are just no report. There are plenty of opportunities
Yep, that's a good point.
for people are, or even just to carried. Like, Dan Porter talks about a buyer. Is that pronounced right? Buyer, bear cloth. I don't know. What do you call
Oh,
it?
yeah,
B
yeah,
I
BIER, buyer cloth or whatever.
Buyer cloth. Or just, like a stretcher. Think about it wartime where they've got these, I guess, canvas stretchers. Think of all the dead bodies that during wartime. I mean, especially like with the in more modern times and like with the Americans, I'm sure they weren't just dumping bodies down. They probably either wrapped them in a cloth if they could. I mean, they're just reasonably speaking, there are plenty of chances for if leaving a natural image is a thing, then we should probably have seen something about it. And the fact that we haven't says something. People say, "Oh, well, you're arguing from silence." Well, okay, there's validity to that, and then there's invalidity to that argument. Because sometimes the historical record on something is silent because it's not there. You know? Sometimes that's just the honest, forget the logic games. Let's just get real. Sometimes things are silent because, it doesn't exist. And when we're dealing with shroud matters, there's a lot at stake. Um, and so people frequently are wanting to engage in, magical doubting because it's comforting to them. It's like, because you know what? People talk about,
Well, do you think you think like you don't think that's the issue with me? Do you like
no, 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 not with
I'm
you, but
not
I'm just saying, but I
just remember
do.
you're a shrink for me, not the
I
not
know, and
me.
okay, I'm gonna get a little bit more head shrinky here. Okay, so I think that with your being a philosopher and you like to be all, with my little Bayesian and my little percentages and this and that. I mean, that's your personality type. I get it.
Mhm.
And it's like with the scientists where a lot of times, and I've seen this with STERP scientists, where a lot of times they were not arguing the evidence to its fullest extent because they wanted to preserve their professional image. It's like, oh, look at me, I'm such a dispassionate, unbiased thinker. And okay, I'm gonna say I'm a shrink.
Mhm.
Sometimes their pride in their professionalism and is more important. Sometimes they are, and this I'm dead on with this head shrinking little observation. I'm dead on with this. And I see it all the time. I see it even with a bunch of people today. It's like, oh, they care more about still getting accepted by their peers in the scientific community, and they don't want to look like the religious zealots that are just so they try to distance themselves so that they can still be, not looked at as like kooks or whatever, religious fanatics by their scientific atheist peers. Who cares what they think? Who cares? You know what? The Bible tells us don't be concerned about what your peers think. Be concerned about what God thinks. Seek to have his approval as to what you do and say, not whether, oh no,
So I've
and then they're also like, oh well, I'm still in academia, so I still need to look good, and oh, my money is dependent on this. I don't want to lose my paycheck. I don't want to get bumped. And anyway, they're probably tenured anyway. But even if they're not, oh, so your money matters more than saying the truth about a miracle of God that can save
is
people's
this
soul? I mean, that's,
are you
this
saying
is,
this is a
I'm
is
just
this
saying in
applicable
general,
to
this is an observation, but you are the little hyper technical with your little percentages and stuff. And so, and you're with your philosophies, stuff that pervades your mindset. And you know what? That's the thing I love about being a lawyer. I am free to advocate. I can just do it. And you know what? There's great beauty in having, it has to be done honestly. And even among lawyers, as much as people would like to, I think this isn't the case. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that all lawyers are ethical, but even with lawyers, we are not permitted to perpetrate a fraud on the court. We are not permitted to knowingly put on fraudulent evidence. So that is part of our ethical restraints. And and sometimes it can get a little dicey in terms of a defendant's right to take the stand and testify. And if a lawyer knows that he's going to get up there and lie, you have to be like dead certain about that. But if a lawyer knows that their client's about to get up there and lie, then there are different ways that it's handled in different jurisdictions. Sometimes it would just be where the lawyer just lets the client do it, and then the lawyer just says nothing. And that's always a tip off to the judge as to what's going on. And it's a bit of a tip off potentially. Sometimes different jurisdictions don't permit that. But anyway, my point is we're not permitted to perpetrate frauds. And as religious people, we're not permitted to perpetrate frauds on anybody, not even for the best of reasons. So I'm certainly would never advocate that because
Okay,
get
so let me respond. Just a couple points just to wrap up that first argument from the natural need. First of all, just to clarify for the audience, again, Teddy is my Shroud shrink, so I'm in the role of the Shroud skeptic. Like what, I'm answering why am I skeptical? Why do I have, technically speaking, reasonable doubt? And just for the audience, what does that mean? Teddy could be totally, for the sake of argument, Teddy could be totally right on a balance of probabilities. I'm just saying that I have at least 5% probable or higher doubt in these arguments, in the Shroud arguments that she's giving. So when I say reasonable doubt, I'm just saying there's a 5% or higher doubt kind of
let's get down to
probability.
brass tacks. Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks.
Well,
Give
hey,
me
I haven't finished my 3 points. You got to let me
uh,
respond. If you want to shrink me, you got to listen to your client, right? So,
not that kind of super
well,
now.
hey, I gave you the reins. If you want me to shut up, no worries. You go ahead and say what you. Do you would you like my response to some of what you were saying earlier? Is
Can
that
I? I'm probably going to forget my point if I don't just say it. How about I just throw my point out and you?
it's your show, so go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So what I was going to say, what image making and blood induced and blood depositing hypothesis do you think has 5% credence to it?
Right.
Because I
So
think that's your burden.
okay. Well, it's a doubt, right? But anyways, the
I'd be a reasonable doubt, not a doubt.
right, but it's still not a claim. But the point is, I would say this, right? So at the time of my conversion, you're talking about the first way, right? From a mechanistic argument standpoint. Okay, so at the time of my conversion, I thought there was one natural mechanism that has unique circumstances that hasn't been proven to have a sufficient opportunity for duplication, either naturally or artificially, even in lab and field experiments yet, and which mechanistically would explain all of the Shroud image features. What was just one that succeeded? This was Dan Spicer and E.T. Totten's electric charge separation mechanism. So that was at the time of my conversion. So the mechanistic argument failed for me at that time. That has now changed. The mechanist, I think, Bob Rucker, I brought up, we did a panel show on it, and I'm now, yep, it fails. It is improbable to be true. So now I think a mechanistic argument will probably work for the Shroud. But I don't know until I finish my book and stuff like that because I haven't covered all of those updates, including Hugh Ferry's image forming mechanism. I haven't it wasn't included in my work in 2018 because I didn't even know about the quem quartas hypothesis. So I need to wait until I'm pretty sure I know Hugh's thing is going to fail, but I need to do the work first and assess it properly first, fully to the best of my ability before I'm going to stamp it. But if you're just asking me what I
Okay, but
know in my
being absurd. Okay, part of okay is your shrink. I have to redirect you on this too because
but I have reasonable doubts on Hugh's theory, for example. I have reasonable doubts about Colin Berry's.
all over the place in terms of what all could, is there green cheese on Mars? Is the moon made of green cheese? Come on. With the shroud, you gotta look at things in context. Context is everything.
Okay.
Do we have any context for why somebody would do some of these weird things that people are claiming like for image, like Hugh the buyer, Hugh with the bas relief, and all. Who's going to do that? Why would they do? I mean,
You're right. I think that's
With the shroud, we've got a very clear context of this cloth. We have Jesus of Nazareth. He made a bunch of claims to divinity, and he also claimed, and we know from historical figures that this isn't just something in the gospels. We know from separate, independent, secular sources and non-Christian sources that there were, you know, the miraculous, the supernatural swirled around Jesus in terms of his reputation. And then he made falsifiable claims. He said, they are going to kill me, and on the third day, I'm going to rise again. Now, what's the magic of the third day? There's so much involved. Third day, three, the Trinity. A little tip off. There's also
wow.
just from rigor mortis and decomposition, all of that kind of stuff. We also know that that would be in terms of decomposition, you're going to start probably having right around the third day, the tail end of the third day. That's when you're just going to start getting that real big putrefaction. Okay, and so the point of the third day could also be signified that this is a time period before there would be the putrefaction, and the fact that we don't see that on the shroud, that is an indicator that an indicia of reliability, an indication of genuineness. Um, and
I agree that there's not decomposition. That's a scientifically proven fact, right? Under criterion A, I would agree with that. I don't have reasonable doubts about that.
yeah, and I mean, and it's like I and one of the things that I don't like to use words like scientifically proven fact. I don't think that there are any. I don't like the use of the word fact on its own. Because to me, that implies 100% certainty. And I think that the only thing that we can be certain of is our own consciousness, per Rene Descartes. Everything else, there can be some uncertainty. And that's why, even with the shroud, I won't say that I'm 100% certain, but I'm definitely beyond a reasonable doubt. I have no reasonable doubts because it's not just about, is there some mechanism under the sun that could create this image? That's not even what needs to be focused on, because let's say there is. Okay, let's say I see a cookie crumb on the kitchen counter. And I just made some cookies and they're all gone. But I see a cookie crumb, and then I start seeing cookie crumbs that lead to my son's room. Now, I think the context is pretty good that somebody who is in my son's room, who is likely my son, ate all the cookies as he was walking to his room or whatever, and probably a bunch of them in his room. Now you might say, oh, but Teddi, Dr. Teddi, um, it could have been a Martian that landed outside your house, got in your house through a magic key, opening up the locked door, ate the cookies, or maybe they're even Martian cookies. Maybe they're not even real cookies. How do you know that that's not the case? Well, it's absurd. That's how you know it's not the case. It is
What?
outside of a reasonable context. You see what I'm saying? It's like
It's
these people,
implausible.
yeah, these
What?
people who want to come up with these
Well, let me. Okay.
cockamamie ideas. It's like, but look at historical Jesus. Look, and that's what my paper is all about. I am starting ground up. I'm gonna show the evidence there was a Jesus of Nazareth. I mean, it's gonna be all about that because you know what? The shroud without the foundation. I'm
Well,
not into
let me.
assuming Jesus. It's like, let's just show the whole thing. And we've got tons of evidence where people can look at all of the Sturt papers and the other papers about the details, but people need to see it. What's so important is seeing the context of the whole thing in order to get rid of the magical doubting. That magical doubting is going to be the destruction of so many people. Well, and if only it were destruction. It's not about destruction because, people talk about death. No, if only, you know what?
Well, well,
If I wouldn't worry about atheists if I believed that they would just die once they died on earth, that they remain dead. I wouldn't be so worried about them because it's like, okay, well, they don't get the gift of everlasting life. But no, I believe in hell and I believe what Jesus said. No,
let
was
me.
Jesus exaggerating? I don't know. But
Uh,
he was definitely warning us, you don't want hell. So I'm going to trust him. And
okay,
and
I have 2 points. Okay, so first of all, and I'm really trying my best to focus down to like help you help me kind of thing. So, but first of all, let me just ask you, how am I doing and coming? Am I sufficiently open-minded, or do you think I'm too resistant? Like I'm trying my best to
I mean,
be charitable and give you
I
the
think
best.
that that's what happens, when we're shrinking heads. There's got to be that back and forth.
Okay,
And you know
okay.
what? And I don't
So
if nothing else, I
sounds
think
pretty good.
what's valuable is that this is something that you can think about.
Absolutely,
You might not get convinced right now. Sometimes people, got to let things marinate a little bit in the mind
for sure.
and think about it. And just, when you're having a dialogue,
Okay.
it's
What?
important to explore and it's not just any explanation under the sun that can give reasonable doubt, because in a
Right.
criminal
What?
situation,
Well, let me. So the 2 points that I want to make, and the first, I'm going to be agreeing with you. Right? So here's me trying to help you out and say, like, yes, I can get on board with something you said about the aliens, right? So let's say, okay, the evidence is we have an empty cookie box and a crumb on the counter. Okay, and the prosecution, Teddy Pappas, no, your defense. Well, okay, fine. The prosecution comes in and says the son ate it or something, and then the defense is saying no, an alien thing, right? An alien ate it or something. So you could say, well, look, those aren't reasonable doubts because given our background knowledge, it's implausible that aliens exist,
why
let
is it
alone would be on
plausible?
it.
You're assuming.
No, based on the background evidence, we could make that argument. But yeah, the point is you can't assume that. You have to prove that. And the way you would do that, the way a reasonable person would, is say, well, what does the background evidence suggest about sentient aliens existing? And what does the physics say that would prevent them from even if they did exist, traveling to Earth and stuff like that, right? But then
Tons of
here's
people that
here's
have
what I would say.
reported
I do
close
you
encounters
gotta
with.
let me finish if you're gonna. Again, it's your show, but like if you want to convince me, I need to hear your things on this, right? So forget about aliens though. Why appeal to magical doubts? I can appeal to reasonable doubts. Maybe a mouse ate the damn cookie, or a
Mhm.
cat came in and stuff like that and ate the cookie and left behind the crumb. And it's you would agree, it's the prosecution, they have the burden of proof to prove your son ate it and not a mouse. The jury doesn't have a burden of proof to prove their reasonable doubts. No, you don't tell the jurist when they're deliberating, prove that a mouse ate the cookie, otherwise we'll assume it was her son. No, the prosecution has the burden of proof. They've made the claim that it wasn't a mouse, it was your son. They have to prove beyond all reasonable doubt to the jury that it was your son and not a mouse, not a cat, not an alien, not anything else kind of thing. So that's the point that I just wanted to get through to you. Whereas I agree with what you're saying, and yeah, I'll get to Hugh in a second, but do you understand that point about the burden of proof and the person making a claim? Like a reasonable doubt is in the claim.
I, but I consider that gamesmanship. Like, oh, well, you made this claim, so you got the burden. No, it's like, hey, how and let's get to your philosopher
Sure.
hat.
Well, that's why
Put
I'm
on
so
your
strict.
philosopher hat. Okay.
Put it
Uh,
on.
yeah, put on your philosopher hat,
Right.
please.
Right.
And um, and I'll put mine on. I love philosophy. Uh, it's not about burden of proof. It's about figuring out what is true, right? Who cares who's making the claim? We have a question. It's not about a claim. We have a question. Is the Shroud of Turin the burial cloth of Christ, of Jesus of Nazareth? And if it is there evidence of the resurrection on it, or is it just not just, but or is it just a photograph of him? So something more than just, Jesus's sandal. If it were, I mean, I don't think we have Jesus's
But
sandal, but I mean,
logic and
it's more than
philosophy
it's
and
something
law.
more special. Uh-huh.
the the burden of proof and using logic rigorously, using logic and reason is the way that we get to the truth. We know those epistemic tools are God-given, and that's how we get to the truth, right? So that the aim using logic and being consistent with the rules of logic and logical inferences, that's the best way we have to get to truth. And that's why I'm so strict on look,
Yeah, I
who's making
agree.
a claim and who's not, who has the burden of proof. Can you
But it's
meet
not
that?
about it's not okay. Being strict with logic, that's not about burden of proof. Logic has nothing to do with burden of proof.
Well, it does actually, because it's a principle in logic that the
Not really.
person.
Logic is about making arguments that are structurally sound. So, you know, like inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, fallacious arguments, those things are important because they cut to whether an argument is solid, but they are completely independent of the issue of who's got the burden of proof. We've all got the burden of proof.
Yeah,
What
anyone who makes a
about what
claim.
about thinking about that? That's a good way
Right.
of thinking.
And
Oh,
that's the way I approach certain explanatory hypotheses, right? Because when Hugh, if Hugh, can he back up his burden of proof? He's claiming the quem veritas hypothesis. Can he prove that kind of thing and say that it's true? We're saying that it's a radiation event. Can we prove that and see that it's true and stuff like that? And how do those explanatory hypotheses compare to each other in order to infer abductively which is the best explanation? That's a way that Bob Rucker or pro-Shroud people argue mechanistically, for example, right? And the other thing I wanted to say about Hugh that I agreed with you on so I think you raised, look, one of the arguments I'm going to be using against Hugh, the reason I think Hugh's hypothesis is improbable, will
mhm.
include an assessment of the historical implausibilities against his notion, right? And stuff like that. Like the notion of a double-sided bas relief. We have no examples of that, even the example. But he does provide an example of a shallow bas relief of almost of a full body image Christ. Again, it's not comparable to the realism of the shroud image and
And I
stuff
don't
like that.
think it has the backside. It's just the front. So, where do we have a bas relief that has frontal and dorsal
So
images
on that front, I
and
would I would agree with
that match like
exactly.
perfect?
So on that
Yeah.
front, I would agree with you that that is very improbable to be true, and it makes Hughes' theory implausible. But I do think I would have a reasonable doubt. Maybe some medieval genius, there's a 5% probability or possibility that some medieval person did it. I don't know if that implausibility argument is powerful enough to go, yeah, it's proven beyond all reasonable doubt that no medieval artist could do that. I need to assess that when I assess Hughes' theory and say,
Okay.
is this strong enough to go? It's there's no reasonable possibility that a double-sided shallow bas relief that Hugh posits could have existed or something like that. You know what I mean? That's how I
I'm
would
sorry,
assess it.
that's my dog snoring.
Oh, I didn't even hear it. No.
It's sitting next to me, in case y'all are wondering what that noise is. Okay, as your shrink, I'm going to bring up. See, now here you are, you're hyper focusing on Hugh's bas relief thing. And that's 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 how the skeptics and anti-shroudists, that's how they make headway. They like, it's no different than like when David Johnson brings up aliens. Oh, he doesn't want to believe in God, but he'll believe in aliens. But anyway, my point is you can't just have tunnel vision and just look at that issue. Okay, now here's where the therapist kind of gives you the global picture. Think about this. What is the likelihood that any artist is going to put details of rigor mortis and cadaveric spasm in their little bas relief? Come on now.
Yeah, I think that would be that's an argument where I would agree with you, probably agree with you. Again, I want to assess it and stuff like that, but based on my previous assessments of other theories, that is one of the powerful things against these artistic mechanisms where I might even agree with you. I think the evidence is strong enough to say it's proven beyond
Checkmate.
reasonable doubt. But again, where reasonable doubt would come in, not in that assessment of the theory, but okay, is it true? Is there actually proof that proven beyond all reasonable doubt that there's evidence of rigor mortis and or a catasverastic, however you say that kind
Yeah,
of thing. That's where
cadaveric.
the reasonable doubt would come in there, I think. Again, it's very powerfully, I believe, the shroud proves there's rigor mortis.
Two medical
Sure, it's
examiners. One was a chief medical examiner, Zugabe, and Buckland was the act. He was kind of like the acting chief. He wasn't quite the chief. He was under Dr. Thomas Noguchi, who's a very famous medical examiner in LA County. He did coroner autopsies on all the big stars like Marilyn Monroe and others, but Buckland had a whole team of forensic medical examiners beneath him. I think it was like 18 medical. So Buckland wasn't just a medical examiner, and Buckland was in that time in LA County, which is where Los Angeles is. That was the murder capital of the world. So he did both Zugabe and Buckland did so many autopsies,
right.
and when they're seeing,
Well, let me
but the points that they bring up about rigor mortis, you don't have to just trust their expertise because a lot
let,
of these can
let me
see
ask you.
body image.
So let me ask you. So this will be good for the audience. So two questions. And again, try to be brief in the answers and stuff like that as you can. But first of all, okay, compared to artistic things, right? So Hugh Ferry, he'll say, well, yeah, of course there is the evidence for rigor mortis, but it's not actually evidence of rigor mortis. It's equally evidence of rigidity. Bas reliefs are rigid and stuff like that. So first of all, how would you respond to to that, how do we know it's actually rigor mortis? What are reasons that prove beyond all reasonable doubt that it's actually rigor mortis and not just rigidity of a bas relief or a statue or something like that?
Well, a painting is rigid too. I mean, a canvas, that just doesn't make any sense. It's the depiction of the body and the positioning. For example, we see that with the buttocks, there's not just a total flattening. That's not, I mean, that these that's why I refer to them as indicia of reliability. That's a legal term. These are subtle, usually subtle, but not always, but frequently subtle pieces of evidence that somebody wouldn't think of adding in order to try to fool somebody, but they're just telltale signs that something is true. And when you look at the body images on the shroud, like you see with the one leg where the calf is there's a heavier you see where there's more flattening because it's hitting uh it's touching
Like one
the
thigh's
cloth. So
thinner than the other.
the imprint, right, is different. No, is that a detail that somebody put into their bas relief? But what about too, the thing that just fascinated me, and I based this, this was my conclusion. It's not, a doctor has not um, said this, and it surprised me that Buckland didn't make this connection. Uh, but I got this from a detail that Buckland provided about the positioning of the chest. I forget the term, it's in my paper,
Mhm.
but he describes the chest. No, Zugby also describes the chest as in a certain way. But Zagaby gives more, excuse me, but Buckland gives more details. And he gave a medical term. Again, I don't remember the specific term for it. But he, what he described, I'm not a doctor. I didn't know what that was. So I Googled it. And when I Googled what happens when a body is in this position, when the chest is in this position, and then I read that that is the position that the body is in, that the chest is in when you're taking in a breath, when you're inhaling. Well, because of the work that I was doing on rigor mortis, and as I was learning the details about postmortem changes in terms of the progression of them, one of the important things that I learned is, and this is very, very critical, and this is where I put the two things together. So normally, and the verbiage is at the moment of death or upon death, there is primary muscular flaccidity where the muscles just completely relax and the body just becomes limp.
Mhm.
That happens not a second after death, not 2 minutes after death, not 30 minutes after death or now. Every paper I was reading that was giving a definition of that at the moment of death. So it's just boom. Okay. Now, when you read about cadaveric spasm, the verbiage it's always given, so it's not my verbiage, it's in these medical journal articles by experts that are usually forensic medical examiners, so they know their stuff. They talk about the distinguish, because people say, oh, rigor mortis, and especially with what Jesus underwent, it could happen real fast. Yes, it can happen real fast. Absolutely. And I am convinced that Jesus went into rigor mortis very rapidly.
Mhm.
perhaps Zugby talks about in his book where there was a case where it happened, like a person was running away from the police and they shot him,
Yeah.
and he froze up, and they were like, it was almost immediate. Okay. But here's the difference. So with a cadaveric spasm, that happens again, the verbiage in all of these papers that I was reading, at the moment of death, at the moment, just like with the primary muscular flaccidity, not a second later, at the moment, at same time. So with what Buckland was describing with the chest being inflated and the particular turn, actually, hold on, I think I've got my, do you
Just
want me to
wondering
look for the paper? Because I got
what.
my paper, but anyway,
No, no. The point I just want to say is great, amazing response. And I would this is how I would argue, and I would agree with you that I actually think that some of the anatomical inaccuracies that Shroud skeptics like to, harp on actually works against them. And possibly, again, in terms of Hugh's case, I haven't written it yet, so I don't want to presuppose what I'm going to do. But against other artistic mechanisms, I use the anatomical inaccuracies against them. It's proven beyond all reasonable doubt that it must be a body and not a bas relief or a statue. What medieval artist would make a statue with one thigh thinner than the other, or is that just an accidental byproduct of the thing, or certain anatomical inaccurate features that would have been obvious kind of thing and aren't explained as artistic accidental byproducts or something like that.
you could
If
say,
you
oh,
can,
he was a crappy artist, like he wasn't very good and he made one a
no,
little
but
thinner.
they're too obvious kind of
But
things.
the
Like,
thing is that it also perfectly aligns with the nail hole situation and with one leg on top of the other, frozen in that position with rigor mortis while the body is hanging on the cross. But then once they remove the nail hole, so imagine you got the 2 feet over each other like this. The nail hole gets removed. I would imagine there's going to be some separation of the two nails because the nail was keeping them together. So there's probably going to be some lifting up. I'm guessing here, but it's a good guess. But then as they bring the body, we see the legs. There's the way and I describe it in detail in my paper, but the positioning of it is pointing to legs that where one foot was crossed over the other, and that causes some differences in how the body and the legs would be if on a flattened surface, and that affects the imprint. That is such a subtle detail.
yeah,
But
and that's my point is that arguments like that can be used against artistic mechanisms because no medieval artist would make a bas relief or a sculpture
exactly,
with these subtle things in it.
it's too
And that
subtle.
that
Too
does
subtle.
prove that could work in proving beyond all reasonable doubt against those types of artistic things. So I wanted to say, like, I can get on board with your reasoning there.
Mhm.
Here's another reasonable doubt. This was my second question, and again, try to 5 minutes or less or something because I want to turn it back to you.
Can
Uh,
I finish up with the thing with the cadaver? Because that's such a cool thing. Just I was almost done with it. Can
okay,
I?
okay, go ahead. I'll
So,
skip my question.
the thing with the what was I talking about with the expansion? So what what Buckland noticed with his observation, and it's in his paper, I cite to it. He is saying that the chest is in this expanded position. Now, a cadaveric spasm typically is just over certain parts of the body that are under stress. It doesn't, first of all, they're very rare, but of the ones that do occur, it typically is not seen over the whole body. Although I did finally find um, a case where it said that On rare occasions, it has been seen to do the whole body, but it doesn't matter with Jesus's case whether it was the whole body or not for the cadaveric spasm. The point is with this issue with the chest is it's in the position of inhalation, taking in a breath. Now, the way that we know that there's a cadaveric spasm as opposed to rigor mortis is because, again, remember, rigor mortis happens after death. So it might happen, 2 seconds after death or 3 seconds after what? I mean, that would be super fast, but let's just say it happened real super, but it doesn't happen at the moment of death. But remember, what we do know happens at the moment of death, unless there's a cadaveric spasm, is there's primary muscular flaccidity. So the way we know that the body image on the shroud shows a cadaveric spasm in the chest is because the positioning of the chest, according to Buckland, is in the position of inhalation. Now, unless there had been a cadaveric spasm to freeze that in place, which is what we see on the shroud, the body image, if we didn't have that, the primary muscular flaccidity would have immediately, through the relaxation of the muscles, mechanically, without, I mean, because we have no brain function since the body's dead, but just mechanically, the body will exhale the breath and then the chest would be down. So that's how we know with the chest that it's not just rigor mortis, because that chest would not be puffed out in the position that Buckland says. Now, did Buckland know what he was talking about? Well, I mean, who he's the one to know, right? He's seen a zillion bodies, done autopsies on them. So that's an interesting point. And Zegebe,
And a rigid bas-relief or statue would not be sculpted in that
I
in
would,
that way.
I
Like,
mean,
or could that be mistaken?
who's supposed to put in details like that? But also the situation with the neck, it's showing a body that's crucified because you don't see a neck on the frontal image. Yet you see they both Zegebe and Buckland talk about it's elongated in the back, but then in the front you don't see it. But that's consistent with the position of crucifixion. But then you see the neck in this position of crucifixion, but then we see the arms down. So then we're like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. That's not the position of crucifixion. Well, that's because they had to put him you know, in a tomb, probably on one of those narrow benches in a niche. So all of these little details converge to show the truth of what's going on. There's so many just little things. And we have, of course, the blood stains which are going, if you look at the bloodstains in the position of the arms as they are depicted on the shroud, they are flowing against gravity. But that's because rigor mortis was broken in order to put the arms in the position of burial, both to fit in the niche and to just be in a dignified position for burial. And then the issue that I bring up with Isabel Picsek, how she said you'd have to be standing in order to draw the body image. You'd have to be stand like on a ladder about 15 feet up, looking down at a model. The model would have to be propped up with pillows and stuff to hold the position of the cross. I mean, there are just so many things. So yeah, I mean, am I understanding that at least in terms of an artificial explanation that you were beyond reasonable doubt that that's impossible beyond a reasonable doubt? Or let's not use word impossible. Let's just say that you're convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that that did not happen in terms of somebody creating the image.
I would probably again I don't want to speak officially until I do finish my research for my book, but I think it's a fair bet that I would have said on the ones that I studied in my at the time of my conversion, and just logically common sense it will apply to all the other ones as well. But just because I haven't studied them, I don't want to say it. But I would say yes. I do think that there's enough
Okay. All
reasons to
right.
rule.
So basically then let's throw that out and let's focus on the natural hypothesis, right? So So with the natural hypothesis, are you what's hanging you up? What's giving you 5%? Like, maybe. Do you think it's decomposition that has done it? Or yeah, what do you think it could be? Because if it's decomposition, that's not gonna just stay so superficial, and it's not going to give the double body images in terms of on the outside, the opposite side of the cloth, like what Julio was talking about.
Sorry, what not going to give you what on the outside of the cloth?
Isn't he talking about doesn't Julio talk about how there's a little bit of body image on the other side
Oh,
of,
double superficial. I don't include that as a proven fact, as a minimal relevant feature on my end. So basically, I had to use my list, the features that I think were proven, right? And so when I did my 2018 assessment, I didn't include a lot of stuff that I didn't think was established, I didn't think was needed, or that I just didn't know about. So for example, you talk about certain ways that I think if true would definitely rule out beyond all reasonable doubt certain artistic mechanisms, like certain anatomical inaccuracies that are just befuddling, and also subtle anatomical accuracies, or wounds on the corresponding to the sides of the face doesn't make sense with a bas relief or something. Why would somebody paint that? So I think those can be used beyond reasonable doubt. But with naturalistic explanations, I think that Dan Spicer and E.T. Totten's are the best. The best one that could potentially explain all of the minimal relevant features that I include as features.
under
But
what
I think
under
just let me finish this. But in light of my panel review where the skeptic Hugh Ferry helped Bob Rucker disprove it, I think that now is it's no longer equally probable. It is now an improbable mechanism. And one thing I should say, because I didn't use a Bayesian approach, when I did my study in 2018, and this is going to apply to my new book because I've decided not to do a Bayesian assessment. It's just too technical and stuff. So I'm reformatting my book to be a deductive argument. But all I care about, look, I don't have to prove is it proven beyond all reasonable doubt that the artistic thing is fake, or that this is all I care about is it provably improbable or not? That's all the reasonable person, right? You talk about not having to be a scholar. That's what I think the legal test of a reasonable person, that's all they care about is it's proven to be improbable to be true. There's a less than 50% probability that this thing is true. And if that's the case, then okay, all ordinary artistic and naturalistic mechanisms are improbable to be true. And I would now include Spicer and Totten's theory, naturalistic theory, in that. That's good enough for the extraordinary mechanistic
a question though,
criteria.
I with Spicer and Taunton, under what circumstances would that have occurred?
So they're ordinary naturalistic, but then they've posited a naturally formed weak vertically collimated electrical field caused by certain circumstances that don't apply to everybody. And this is why another reason I don't
What
think,
kind of circumstances?
well, they posit about four different ones, right? So they say this field can be generated from an earthquake, or just like what happened with Jesus, or thunderstorms, or something like that, working in conjunction with Jesus' body in Jerusalem in that particular
There are
tomb.
lots of thunderstorms and a lot of that sounds cuckoo.
I don't think I don't.
Come on.
I don't think
That's, I mean, I'd rather go with the aliens. I mean, it's
that
just,
no,
oh,
that's
come on.
I
A
have reasonable doubts. Let's say I think it's
thunderstorm,
improbable.
a bolt of lightning from Zeus just
Look,
came down.
it's a
Oh,
scientifically proven fact. These
we got a
electrical fields
body and
form.
oh, come on. That is so cuckoo.
Wait, Teddy, these electrical fields form. This is a fact, okay? And
And
although,
why don't we have a bunch of these
but and
body images of
Ray and it
God?
works in conjunction with Ray Rogers' Maillard reaction. Okay, so
Not reasonable. That your
I
therapist
think
says
it's
not
reasonable. I think
reasonable.
it's
That shrink,
improbable.
shrink says no
Very
reasonable doubt to that.
sorry.
The shrink says no reasonable doubt for that.
What is unreasonable about positing an
The
electric
whole
field
oh, come on, because we
working
would
in conjunction?
have examples of hey, look at this, you know. I mean, we've got better examples when over, I can't remember if it was here in Nashville or something. There was uh, somebody said like a cinnamon bun that looked like Mother Teresa, and they dubbed it irreverently the nun bun, but it looked just like her. I mean, I'd more likely think that's a miracle than
There was intelligent design, right, by a human being there. So the but essentially here, the Maillard reaction was Ray Rogers an idiot? Was he unreasonable? Again, don't
I think he was desperate to come up for it to hold on to his scientific bona fides. I think that's an example of some, and my understanding is I believe he was, my understanding is he was a Christian, but I think that's probably a good example of somebody who is bending over backwards with mental gymnastics to come up with an explanation to something that is not the resurrection. That is magical doubting.
okay,
That's,
okay.
and even Ray Rogers,
So you would
that
say
magical
the
doubter,
May
is with as many great things as he did, he was still trying to um,
let me
hear more about his appearance to fellow scientists. And so I disagree with that.
okay. Let me say this then. Again, I'm doing my best to. So I would agree with you. Actually, I do think, as much respect as I have for Dr. Ray Rogers and his work, I do think he was unreasonable with his anti-supernatural bias. That was unreasonable. He was not being a reasonable person with respect to how he treated supernatural hypotheses and his dismissal of it. That said, his work on the Maillard reaction I think was reasonable. It is a proven natural mechanism that works and would create images. He himself recognized that there were limitations. He knew that the Maillard reaction on its own could not form those images. So even he admitted that. Again, very reasonable. But that's why I like Dan Totten. They're basically positing this electric field that helps solve some of the issues of the gas diffusion of the Maillard reaction in terms of the collimation. I think it's reasonable, but I agree. Look, I'm on your side. I think it's
See, they called it
improbable.
the whole gas diffusion thing, like Vignon and all that, that didn't work. That did not, that didn't work.
But it would hypothetically, according to Totten and Spicer, if they're posited this electric field
Yeah,
at the same
you
time.
know, you may as well have Martians involved in this. It just gets absurd. It gets absurd. And when you're weighing that
Hmm.
versus Jesus, the man that made multiple claims of being not just a son of God, but the son of God, which points to divinity. And I mean, he made it clear he's God.
Why? I guess to help me then. So here's what here.
He
Oh,
said he
just
would rise again. And why wouldn't God give us evidence of that, given that God, our God, is a God that it didn't just say, oh, trust me, you know, just believe that I am who I am. No, God, Jesus was performing miracles. Jesus was resurrecting people. Jesus was, you know, turning water into wine. I mean,
So,
he was walking
so
on
let
water.
me
He was doing things to show people that he's the real deal. He didn't just say, just trust me. He wasn't that way. And so
well,
why, and people, these atheists,
forget
they keep
about this isn't
wanting,
helping me. Like, so here's what would help me, right? Because again, you want to shrink me. So you said something very specific that it's absurd. Okay, so I don't see the theory as absurd. I'm on your side. I'm pro-Shroud. I think after my panel review, I don't think it's an equally probable thing. I think it is improbable. It is a failure as a theory, but I see
Mhm.
it as reason. It's 5% or more possible. It's plausible it could be true. And the difference is you say it's absurd, it's like the aliens, but it's not because the Maillard reaction and an electric field forming through these mechanisms are established things that happen. Now there is questions, okay, how do they work together? Where does it become absurd for you? Is it like how they would have to work
I think we would
together?
have seen that. And if not, then why didn't Ray Rogers try to replicate that getting, or why didn't the other Spice or whatever um try to replicate it and meet the criteria and get the $1 million from David Rolfe?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. That's one of the things I had an issue with as to why I don't think there has been a sufficient amount of testing because they haven't been able to test their theory to see what results do they get in the same way Giulio Fonte has tested his corona discharge. It's basically a naturalistic version of Giulio Fonte's corona discharge, right? His is high energy, which is why it's supernatural, if I'm saying it, remembering it properly. And theirs is low energy, which makes it something that happens in nature or something like that.
And I'm not really even sure whether I haven't come down on one way or the other in terms of high energy, low energy. I mean, it could be high energy that it is so lightning fast. But, the other thing is too, I think it's resurrection energy, supernatural. I don't think anybody's going to find any energy that's going to do what
But
bringing
is
Jesus.
it how the two just for me to consider because I will consider this and when I'm writing my book I have to reconsider Dan because obviously I've changed right since I've learned about so Bob Rucker gave great objections based on the fine tuning which he would say makes it improbable and this is convincing me that
Oh,
the way this field and the Maillard reaction would have to work together involves certain subtle examples of fine tuning that would not happen naturally. You would have to posit supernatural stuff. So just so I understand your thinking, is that what you're saying is the absurd part? Why
yeah,
it's
because
okay?
it's so beyond the pale in terms of being what happened, as opposed to a situation where a cloth has a context to it. It's not it's not just a cloth that exists in a vacuum. But people want to treat it that way, but it's not. Because
Okay.
again, this is
So I'll just say this
if
quickly.
it is what it is, then there's a whole line of evidence leading up to it.
Let me
And
just say this quickly. So sorry, because so I agree with you. I think that might be valid reasoning. The only reason I need to rethink this as I write my book and redo the Dan Spicer section. But the only reason I have reasonable doubts at this time is based on my personal ignorance. Like I need to look into is it true what Bob Rucker was saying about the points of fine tuning? You know, how improbable is it? Is it 95.01% proven ridiculous or not? And right now, my reasonable doubts are just based on my ignorance. That will be fixed when I write that section of my book.
I
And
just don't
maybe
even
you're
think
right.
you need that. I mean, that's icing on the cake, but I don't think that you need that in order to get to beyond a reasonable doubt. There, think about this too, in terms of natural body image formation. Ray Rogers, he was talking about putrefaction being involved. Okay, but putrefaction, that's liquid stuff. That would create capillarity. There is no capillarity.
Mhm.
with the body image. So we have to contend with that. And how would it remain so superficial with decomposition? That's why it's a no-go. That's why, I mean, for, I
I,
mean, you have situations in I think it's in Hiroshima and Nagasaki where they're from the bomb when it went off that it's created those shadows. I forget what they call them. You know what I'm talking about?
yeah, yeah, yeah. But okay, well, you mentioned certain things, and I agree with you. I think these are ways to rule out possibly even Dan. Like obviously Ray Rogers knew about these, right? That's why he says, "Oh, the body was removed very soon before decomposition liquids would accumulate in sufficient quantities." I
No,
even that.
he was saying that there was decomposition, and I remember Mark
What?
Antonacci was being like, "What?"
Okay, okay. And there's question about that, right? Like, especially within the bodily orifices, this is an issue. But the superficiality or something like why, again, I'm just trying to say like why someone might have a reasonable doubt, a mere 5% possibility. John Jackson, the Turin Shroud Center of Colorado, these pro-shroud experts, they go, yup, Ray Rogers can do the superficiality because he posits this micro thin, no evidence. He just, well, not sufficient evidence. Let's say he posits this micro thin starch layer on the surface of the shroud, and that's what causes the images. Hence, the images are only on the superficial layer. Now, me, as of 2018, when I saw John Jackson granting that, that gave me reasonable doubts. Like, okay, if he's saying Ray Rogers' theory would accomplish it, then maybe he's right. Now, I've learned since then that it's not that simple. I think they were being too generous to him because there are issues with the bodily orifices, which would definitely penetrate through. But at the time of my conversion, I had reasonable doubt because here's supernaturalist John Jackson saying, yeah, Ray Rogers can reproduce superficiality with the Maillard reaction. So just to explain my mindset as of 2018 when I wrote my Shroud book, that was something that gave me reasonable doubts on that front that,
But
yeah,
how
maybe
did
it
he do
was.
it? He didn't do it with decomposition. He didn't do it with getting putrefaction from a corpse, shoving it on a linen cloth, and he didn't do that. I've never read of him doing something like that, right? He didn't do that. So what's it
Well,
talking
here,
about? I mean,
so here's,
I
I
think
can
that
read
Pete's
it to you.
right. He found evidence of starch. So I
Let
think
me,
that there,
let
oh,
me
sure,
show
go
it.
ahead.
I can actually show you. And here's John Jackson's words, word for word, what he says. So, do you see that? Let me, Ray Rogers, this is the Maillard reaction. This is from the Turin Shroud Center of Colorado, 27 dates to 2017, right? He says Rogers hypothesized that amine gases reacted with the superficial starch contamination layer left on a microthin evaporation surface on the shroud. If it is granted that he was correct in his starch contamination theory, then a superficial image could be achieved through the Maillard reaction proposed in his hypothesis. Um, so that was the basis of my kind of just in 2018, just fine, I'll grant it to Rogers. I guess he can reproduce this. But
Okay, well, first of all, we can't go by what Jackson's summary is. You got to go, got to
fair
go
enough.
back to the original source and see what Rogers has said. And I seem to recall, I have Rogers's book, um, but I seem to recall that he was definitely talking about decomposition, not just gases coming. He was talking about,
Well, the gases emerged through decomposition. It's
yeah,
part of
I mean, there's a certain amount of, I mean, technically, the body starts decomposing about 4 minutes after death.
yeah.
Um, and so, what's it called?
And for the record, you're right. Jackson was being too generous, I think, to him. There, especially with the bodily orifices, there are issues which I know about
No,
now.
there's no cementation either, too. You gotta. So if there's enough decomposition,
Do you,
um,
but just so I know, sorry, I keep interrupting, but I'm just curious. Based on that, when you see John Jackson giving that reasoning, do you think it's at least a reasonable doubt? So I'm not saying it's
Even
probable,
give
but
any
true.
credence to that. I'd want to look at
Okay.
um, what Rogers said, and I seem to be pretty confident in recalling that he was thinking there was some heavy decomposition going on. Because I remember that was a big deal for Mark Antonacci with what Rogers was saying, and I remember that was a big deal. So I'd have to go back and
Now, one one
re-examine.
thing I will say at this time, I didn't have access to the peer-reviewed primary literature. As Barry had not sent me the zip file of the STIRP, and they weren't freely available on Shroud. That happened after my conversion, right around November of 2018, when he was finally able to post that up. So I didn't have access to those doing the best I could with the resources God had given me. I felt it was reasonable to go, you know what, if John Jackson is saying it can accomplish it, I'm just not even going to bother arguing it. I'm going to disprove Ray Rogers on other grounds. Fine, let's say he can do superficiality, but he fails on no cementation or he fails on
I'm
other.
trying to remember with it's been so long since I've read Vignon. Um,
Oh, Vinian is horrible. Yeah, that
did
he's
Vignon did,
vapors.
did he tried to do like a gas diffusion thing from what I recall, right?
Yes, he
Um,
did. He did it with
but,
vapors,
yeah.
basically.
But I mean, is what Roger the question is what Rogers was what he was hypothesizing, did it manage to get around the problems that Vignon experienced?
To a significant degree, for example, yes, like his theory deals with he wouldn't just get a blurry image like what Vinian got. He posited ways of focusing or guiding the gases to to give a better image, but again, it still wasn't good enough. It's not going to be the shroud, and that's why he admits like the Maillard reaction, gas diffusion by itself is not going to cut it. You need, and Barry Schwartz says this too, you need something else. And that's where I came in. Oh, the Dan Spicer, this electric field, which might have guided the gases or something like that. But in terms of just Rogers, he still suffered from the same problems, but not to the same degree. And in some cases, yes, he solved problems that Paul Vinian, his vaporograph hypothesis had in the 1930s.
What about too, like in a morgue? I'm trying to think when they store the bodies, don't don't they frequently have them wrapped in a cloth? I'm not sure. I
Hold
think
on,
so.
I'm just trying to find a.
Because a lot of times a person can be sitting in a morgue for a while. And no, think about it in America and other places. I mean, the bodies are probably refrigerated, but think about in second and third world countries where they don't have that. What are they doing with the bodies as they are awaiting burial? Uh, no, some, like the Jews, I think you're supposed to bury them what the same day before sundown, I think, or some the Jews bury very quickly. And I think that might be the same way with the Muslims. But there's still bound to be other places in third world countries where people die and they don't have refrigeration to put a bunch of corpses in, or the money to spend on refrigeration. And so corpses are probably wrapped in a cloth, I would imagine. What are they going to just going to dump them somewhere? Probably not. They're probably going to, if they can afford to put them in a cloth and give them some sort of a respectful way to be
Oh,
as their burial. But so why do we not have example? I mean, it's just it's grasping It's straws. It's magical doubting. It's it's trying to look for everything but the obvious. I mean, something, if something is true, almost always there's going to be evidence to prove it's true. Why, you know, a, a lot of people just don't want to believe that God would give us this gift, or a lot of times people want God to give us proof of his existence. Well, gee whiz, what more can you ask for than evidence on a claw? I mean, he made claims. We know this from multiple lines of information. Four different gospels. There's information from secular sources and non-Christian sources. He made truth claims. It's like, was he a liar, a lunatic, or Lord? And he gives us the proof in the form of this cloth. It's got his blood on. I'm still at a loss as to the blood stains. I'm not sure how those got on there without staining. And I keep going back to Bob Rucker's hypothesis with how during the image making process with the resurrection that could have thrust the blood onto. I haven't made any firm decisions on that. I'm gonna have that's gonna take a lot. That's probably gonna take months of very heavy contemplating just on that issue for me to figure that out. And I will in the future when I get to the forensic stuff. But
Okay. Well, I guess the last thing I'll say on this Ray Rogers. So there were differences. Paul Vinian used lighter than air vapors or gases, whereas Paul Ray Rogers posited heavier than air molecules,
hmm,
and that combined with certain convection currents helped, right? But it's still not perfect. So here's a visual.
what difference would that make the heaviness of the molecule?
Because it's not as going to be erratic in the air when it's flowing and stuff to the cloth. It's not going to be as affected by the air and stuff, right? So it's not going to be as diffuse as Paul Vinion's was.
Gotcha,
The
gotcha. Okay.
important point to recognize is that blanket qualitative statements about diffusion and resolution cannot be supported by simple assumptions. Simple assumptions based on Paul Vinion. Now it's interesting, Rogers never gave us any experimental results of the image, but from John Jackson says experimental evidence would need to be presented and carefully scrutinized as to how the high resolution would work with this heavier than air gas mechanism. And I think he does have kind of an image of one experiment that was later done using Ray Rogers. So you can see it's better than Paul Vinian, but is this the
Huh.
shroud? No, right? And look, my gosh, look at the VP8. The thing sucks. Looks like Hugh's image of an apple with a hole in the head or something. But yeah, so you can see they're improving.
And then, again, we can't get lost in
Yeah.
techniques. We have to
Well, so
deal with it. Somebody would have had to have gotten a crucified man who went into rigor mortis on the cross, that had permission to where somebody claimed the body. So it had to have likely have been a Jew, because, well, most likely, because a lot of times they were given permission to bury their dead because of, um, what it talks about. What was it in Deuteronomy about how to leave a person hanging uh, on a tree, or, the
yeah.
wood, uh,
So
it would
I want
create
to.
a curse on the land.
All right, so we're at 1:30. So I want to so first of all, I have a couple things to be the shrink for you now. But
Oh.
before is there anything have you covered everything that you wanted to be my shrink about? Like do you at least understand why I claim to have reasonable doubts, whether you think I'm mistaken on that front or not? Um, do you
I
understand me
still
better?
don't, I still don't see where there's even a 5% chance that, because again, you can't just narrow it down to whether a certain thing is going to work. A certain thing has to work with a crucified body that is exhibiting rigor mortis while still on the cross, dying, and a cadaveric spasm. You've got to put all of the criteria plus the wacky hypothesis.
Do you th
And the likelihood of that ain't there, 5% with that.
do you think that there's a 5% probability? So obviously, all the experiments that have been done, the field and lab experiments, utter failures, right? Everybody knows that. So it has an art, it has. But I'm just saying, do you think that the artificial opportunities have been sufficient to
Oh
prove
yeah,
that?
I
Because
think it's
he will,
all. I
because
think it's
they'll.
all.
Well, the question is, skeptics will say, well, yeah, those experimental results failed, but if I just modified the procedure a little bit, then it would have worked this way or that way.
Retro engineering stuff. And isn't that what they say about the flagram? Oh, I mean, which they're right. The copies of the flagrams that exist right now, that a lot of people mistakenly use, not realizing that people were looking at um, the scourge marks on the shroud and then reverse engineering, like, okay, so what would make this mark? And that's how they've got the little dumbbell thing. But we don't have these dumbbell type things in existence as artifacts. But that whole argument about how it's, I mean, and I won't say that it's always illegitimate, but the problem with reverse engineering applies to this too, where they're trying to do that with image formation. It's like, come on, where do we see something like the shroud anywhere else? It's not there because it's a miracle that is meant to let people know that Jesus Christ resurrected on the third day. Here's his blood. And when people have had the incredible opportunity, I haven't, unfortunately, to to be in the presence of the shroud, they can know that they're, with such profound confidence that they are in the presence of not just the blood the blood and body from Holy Communion, but the physical blood. Wow, that's just
Okay.
something.
Well,
something.
as a Protestant, you know my stance on that stuff or whatever. We have,
Communion, but you can't tell me as a Protestant, can you, that if you know beyond a reasonable doubt that that's Jesus's blood on the shroud, would that not be the most stunning thing to be in its physical presence?
no, I think it would have great. It would have, sure, you could say stunning, but it wouldn't be the most stunning or something. It would have great
I gotta
historical.
do a lot more head shrinking on
I would admit it has great historical and sentimental value that it otherwise wouldn't. But
mental that.
the
Oh,
most important theological thing, I have Jesus. That's the most stunning. He's in my heart. I don't care about blood that he shed. That's not him.
in your
Jesus
heart
is who
that,
I kind of.
I've given this example before. So like I consider Abraham Lincoln to be a great American hero. And when I was in my freshman year at college, my friends and I, we went to Washington, D.C. During spring break, and we went to Ford's Theater where Lincoln was assassinated, and across the street was a home that they brought Lincoln to. I don't think he was dead quite yet, but they brought him there, laid him down on a bed, and they still have the bed and the pillow that has his blood stain on it. And you can see it and you can be in its presence, just, like 2 feet away or something like that from it. And there was something really special about, and I mean, it's not like Lincoln was a god, but he was a hero of mine and many other people. And to I mean, obviously he's dead, so I
Well,
can't
what's
meet him
great.
in person, but it's like I was there with a part of him.
I
Create
agree
the
that it has
connection.
value. Like when I went to Egypt, a lot of people thought this. I just thought I was a weirdo, but I love touching the Wailing Wall or touching the
Mm.
pyramid. Like I touched it. I'm a part of the history now, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
value in. I'm not denying that in any way. But it's not the greatest thing. Like there's great value in the shroud. I cherish it from most importantly from a theological perspective. There's value because it can save souls by
Mhm.
providing evidence for the miracle. But when it comes to, would I rather have a shroud with Jesus's blood on, atoning blood on it,
And
or
a stain.
Jesus himself in the
Well,
flesh?
you have
I
all
would
of
rather
it.
be with Jesus.
But
Yeah,
you have all of it. And
you
it's
can.
but the shroud is a confirmation that is so much more beyond faith. It takes you beyond faith. Faith is weak compared to knowledge.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm gonna very well. I've said what I said, but I have my two things that I want to psychoanalyze you on.
Uh-huh.
So okay, so let's pretend I reassess my book and reassess the shroud evidence, and let's say I come out from 70 point what was it 15%, 70.15%. I come out and I announce to the shroud community, I'm now 95% convinced. So I'm
Yeah.
not proven beyond reasonable doubt. That would be 95.01 or higher,
Oh
but I'm
gosh.
95%.
We need to do
Why on
psychoanalysis
earth?
on your with the percentages. But anyway,
I'm just saying, why would that not be good enough for you? Why would you say, no, you have to be 95.01? Like what is it about you that says, look, I'm saying I believe the shroud is a miracle, a proof for Christianity, and I'm convinced on a balance of like why does it have to be a certain
it's okay because
percentage?
it's not about the percentage. It's not about 0.5% or something like that.
.01.
That's what yeah.
Sorry.
I mean that's where I say I don't like
But would that if I came out and said 95%, would you be happy with that? Or would you, no,
sure. I
dude,
mean,
you
yeah,
still
no,
need
no,
the
that's great. But again, as your shrinker, your head shrinker,
Mhm.
I want to
Shroud shrink.
shroud shrinker. I want to redirect you to reframe how you think about it. Don't think about, okay, I'm 95 points. Think about it in terms of, is there reasonable doubt for me to think this is something other than Jesus's supernaturally created image on a burial cloth? Is there reasonable doubt? That's the question. Forget the numbers. Is there reasonable doubt? There can be doubt because one can doubt anything, but that doesn't make it reasonable. Reasonable doubt, the way it's explained to a jury, is where, or not reasonable, but finding something beyond a reasonable doubt means that you can feel so confident that something is true. Not that there's not some possibility of aliens or lightning strikes and earthquakes and UFOs and all. I mean, anything's possible. Anything's possible. But can your mind rest easy? Can a reasonable mind, because there's some crazy minds out there, but can a reasonable mind rest easy in with the evidence that has been presented in concluding that something is what, the whole claim is about? That's what it's about. So for people to still constantly think, oh, well, maybe it's this, maybe that's just grasping at straws, magical doubt. That's just people trying to be polemics and just trying to come up with anything just to throw you off. But is it reasonable? And again, context matters. You can't just look at the evidence, each piece of evidence in isolation. It's about all of the evidence converging, and how much evidence is it? And you don't necessarily, sometimes I see authenticists too eager to get a zillion pieces of evidence to argue, and some of them are not as good as the others. And I'm like, you know what? I don't want the evidence. Just give me the good stuff, and go with that. And you can maybe throw in the other evidence later on to kind of gild the lily. But in terms of your foundation, stick with the stuff that's rock solid. Otherwise, somebody's going to come in and they're going to try to bulldoze, the house that's built on a crummy foundation. Um, so it's about, is there reasonable doubt? And when you look at all of these hypotheses, and because again, you can't just look at the hypothesis and whether the hypothesis can work. You have to then add all of the other criteria to it. So the person had to have the little magical hypothesis and a body and rigor mortis and cadaveric spasm and in the position of crucifixion
Well,
and no capillarity, and then the blood stains too. Yeah,
that's my so
all
that's
of it together. So it just becomes absurd to think that this is anything other than what we think it is.
so that's my second and last psychoanalysis, and then we can wrap up of you is I'm shocked to hear from you the devil's in the details. You say this over and over
And
again.
God is in the details too.
Or God is in the details too, right? So that I'm shocked to hear you say, no, just focused on the forest, forget the trees. No, we
Got
need
to
to
do it
look at the
all.
trees and then look back at the forest as a whole. But if otherwise, if we just look at the forest, it might all be an illusion. Maybe there are no actual trees. It's
Every piece of evidence is going to have flaws.
So
Everything.
that's when you do that's why my methodology for putting those together cumulatively is much better than just randomly doing it in my head. Because when I just jumble things up in my head, I am different on different days, and I'm horrible. We all are horrible at doing that, actually. As human beings, we just suck at enumeracy and putting all the
The
pieces of a
jurors do
puzzle
it every
together.
day.
No, no,
Jurors all around the world do it every day. They
right. But
take a ton of evidence, and they get a feel for whether something is, whether there's reasonable doubt.
there have been time. Okay, well, I definitely have reasonable doubt if it's just jumbling it up. But the point I wanted to make to you is by breaking it up this way, it's and using a objective mathematical way to get the cumulative total of all those individual bits. First of all, I'm not cheating. There's no bias. No one can. People might accuse me of bias with the individual trees, but no one can accuse me of bias in putting the forest together, and you can assess my reasons as to is this a tree or not. And I provide that all in writing, just like everybody else does, right? Everyone is doing the exact same thing I'm doing, but it's just when I'm turning those trees into a forest, my way is perfect because I'm using a mathematical formula. Yours is just, okay, well, I think I have these trees, and now is it a forest or not? Let me just decide overall. And that is not a reliable way because I've found that when by breaking it up, I actually have a higher probability than what I feel. I have a skeptical bias to me, and I find, and I noted this is why I do my probability warrant assessments 3 times to see is there a pattern or are they widely off and stuff like that, which would suggest something's gone wrong or I'm having a bias or maybe I missed some new evidence or something, right? So if I'm seeing this consistency, that would help. But that's why I do that assessment multiple times. I would find out, look, the way I'm feeling may be totally odd. There were days when I felt like a Shroud skeptic. This is all just nonsense and stuff, right? But where when I put the evidence together in this Bayes theorem and approach it methodically with this criteria, does it fulfill this? Does it do that? Check, 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 and then put it into Bayes theorem to get the total. I actually get higher levels of warning. It comes out and I'm like, oh, it's
But
actually
you
right.
obviously don't because your level of warrant, or at least, well, at least back in 2018, is way lower.
70% was higher than what I would have
And I
probably.
mean, I had a higher level of warrant when I was 15 years old, just reading Gary Habermas and Ken Stevenson's
I don't
book.
think that was warranted, to be honest. But at that time, again, that's neither here nor there. We can debate that and stuff. But again, just reading one book, you were not warranted. I'm sorry
I
to
mean,
say it.
there
Unless
were enough things about it. I mean, granted, I now know way more than about the details than what was in the book, but I'm telling you that just from that book, when a few years later, the 1988, because that would have just been about 3 or 4 years later, when the radiocarbon dating results came out, I was 18, and I just knew from what was in Gary and Ken's book that something's wrong with the radiocarbon dating or how they're interpreting it. I mean, because with Bob Rucker's hypothesis, the radiocarbon dating result is correct, but the interpretation of it, meaning that the cloth is medieval, is incorrect if his hypothesis
Okay,
is
so
correct.
I suppose my question here to psychoanalyze you here is that it seems totally, the advice you're giving seems totally wrong because, so I want to know why. My question for you is why, if truth is truth, right? Why would you think that recommend me not to break up and assess the individual components of the arguments and stuff like that properly, like why, and just no, instead just jumble things up in your head that can try to consider it all at once and just make a quick overall judgment? Isn't it better to break things up and go, okay, what's the proof that it is actually blood? How did we prove that? What are the arguments for and
Okay,
against? Like the
because
systematic method's better, no?
because the whole is much greater than the sum of its parts. And by just focusing on each part, if you're going to do that, okay, so I'm going to say there's a way to do that, but when you're giving the assessment of the Spicer hypothesis,
Here's something simple. Let's use this example. Something simple, the proof that there's blood. Let's pretend there's just three. They found hemoglobin. That's evidence number one. I look at that individually. There's immunoglobin and there's serum albumin. Just pretend those are the three proofs that we have for
orphans are the big one.
or porphyrins, whatever one you want to say. There's those three things. What do you mean? Okay, if I cumulatively assess each one of those things individually, and then I get a cumulative total, it's 80, 90% proven that it's blood or something. You're saying actually, no, it's 95% because there's something missing outside of those three evidences. Like what does that mean? Like, I don't understand what you mean by the
Because,
pool's
because,
greater than.
because, because realistically, we know that the odds of it being something else just don't make sense. So, it's adding the factor of common sense into the
Oh,
equation.
okay. So one thing I didn't mention. So again, you haven't read my book, obviously. I know you've told me you've read. just the Macron part, and that you said I needed to improve it and stuff. So I will be doing that in my new book. But I'm
Well,
just
it
gonna,
wasn't that. It was there were just some things that had changed. So I mean, it
yeah.
wasn't that it sucked or anything. That was
Okay.
never what I said. That was
Oh
there was
no.
just things that were older scholarship where some things have changed, and I recognize, and that's just all I said. But I mean,
Fair
I,
enough. I was
yeah,
trying
I've been
to.
so busy with my own stuff. I haven't had time to read anybody's book other than the core books that I need for my own stuff, which are the primary sources.
Shame,
You know,
shame.
the Heller, Adler,
I know.
Rogers.
I was just trying to joke with you there, but
Right, right.
I was trying to make a point and I lost it or something. Oh, uh, something about the part whole. I don't know. I would just say yeah. The parts.
Common
Oh,
sense,
I
the common
remember.
sense part.
Yes. Okay. So one part of my detailed methodology, so I assess these things not just on the minimal relevant features, but after the minimal relevant feature, I say whether they pass or fail in terms of explaining this feature or not. I also have the section for each hypothesis called the cumulative case considerations and conclusions. And this is where I use the criteria for inferring the best explanation inference criteria. So I
Right,
look
right.
at it in terms of plausibility. So that, that would rule out right there. I consider what's the historical plausibility of, for example, Walter McCrone posited that his paint was 0.01% solution of paint and 0.01. That's historically implausible. That's absurd. So I have an assessment of the plausibility of the hypothesis as a whole, the forest. And I
Mhm.
also look at explanatory scope, explanatory power, and
Okay,
then
well, so good. Very
less ad
good.
hoc. So I do have the I assess it in terms of the individual features, and then I brought out and look at the forest and assess it in terms of these four best explanation inference criteria. So if that's what you're saying, I do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's yeah, because that's great. I mean, that's you want to bring in, assess the individual hypothesis, but it can't just be like, oh, yeah, this could work. But then you don't consider all the other stuff that has to occur in order to get us the shroud image. That's just what I'm saying. And I haven't read your book other than just that little bit, so I don't know what all you've said, but that's just my point. It can't just because sometimes I'll see you focusing in on whether something will work, but it's like, but you gotta get the other stuff in there.
Yeah.
Who
The
who
way
who
I
who
see it,
all, who all gets a has a crucified body and rigor mortis and they're
well, I didn't even as rigor mortis as a minimal relevant feature. So that's in 2018. I assumed that rigor mortis and rigidity of a bas relief and statue were equally probable. I just didn't even bother getting into that debate because I'm like, I don't need that argument. I don't even
get
need for it
those
to,
blood stains. How do you get those blood stains on there?
yeah.
That's
Yeah. I
a
think
lot. I think
that's
a lot of people think that we have a good explanation. I don't see it. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, I just
more
wanted
and
to confirm you're correct. I think that we need to look in at assess each individual tree and establish that they're trees. And then
yeah,
after we're done that, once okay, this is a tree, this is just a cardboard cutout, push it down. Once we get all the real trees,
yeah,
then
yeah,
look back and assess the forest as a whole, the
yeah,
hypothesis.
yeah. Okay.
And yeah, so I agree with you on that. Yeah, we need to do that. So
Good, good. Then, yeah.
cool.
Uh, so,
All right.
uh,
Well, Shroud Shrink Teddy, let me know how was I as a patient? I was trying my best to,
I think it's great. I think you did great.
all right. What would you summarize I ponder upon as I to summarize, what are the main points you want me to ponder on
I
as your
would
patient?
say what what I want to be the thing that just constantly works in your head is what mechanism for both blood and body image, as well as why would anybody do that and go through that much trouble, especially when they wouldn't need to in order to accomplish whatever they might have been trying to accomplish. I mean, if they're just trying to make an icon of Christ, why go through that much effort? If they're trying to fool people, why are they putting things in there to fool people that nobody would notice or understand unless they were a forensic medical examiner in modern times? You know, just think, take away some of the, don't focus only on the scholarly stuff, focus also on the common sense. Like, what's reason? Would somebody have done that? Would somebody have done that? And that's got to be something that replays in your head, and and just could it have done that, or are we in alien territory, like little green men doing stuff, a Martian forger with magical abilities did that. It's just,
Sounds like
and
every time you mention that, I think, oh, that's Hugh. He was a
yeah,
little
well, and David Johnson with all his
Star
alien.
Trek and stuff
I
like
mean,
that.
he
Yeah,
he gets into stuff about oh, hold on. I think I may have to sign for something at the door. Can you hold on a sec, real
yeah, no
quick?
worries. No worries. Yeah, I was just gonna wrap up anyways. So, well, yeah, I'll let Teddy finish off when she gets back. But yeah, I think it was interesting. I hope the audience, this is something, a different format. Never in a million years would I have considered and stuff like that. But yeah, Teddy, I thought it was interesting. Teddi Pappas, the Shroud Shrink, and trying to psychoanalyze me. Why don't I think the Shroud? Obviously, I'm pro-Shroud, right? I know in this episode I'm kind of playing the Shroud skeptic a bit, or not even playing. I'm exposing what I personally really, what causes skepticism within me with respect to the Shroud. So we were kind of assessing that side, and on that front, it was kind of fun and interesting to try to put myself into the Shroud skeptic side and say, why do I have doubts that are reasonable and stuff like that? And I think that was a helpful exercise. Teddi Pappas, the Shroud Shrink. I think you've cured me. Thank you.
Good,
No,
good.
no,
I'm here to help.
there you go.
My work is done. Yeah, but yeah, it's about thinking. Um, okay, if you say, well, I'm 85% sure. Well, it's like, what hypothesis can you think of that has a 15% likelihood of being plausible? Taking in all of the considerations. So that's how it's important to think of it in those terms, and not just whether something can work, but would somebody really have done that, or would that occurrence have really have happened? And would that occurrence have happened with a body that has the bloodstains of crucifixion and the telltale bloodstains of the crown of thorns?
Yeah,
There's
I would
only
have.
only one, there's only one crucified person that we know of from history that was crucified with a crown of thorns, and that was Jesus of Nazareth. So who had the natural body, the dead body that was crucified with a crown of thorns? So, see, you got to think about that too. That's a big one to contemplate. If, with these image mechanisms, what? There's some other guy with the crown of thorns that was crucified, and then the lightning strike hit, and the person was already in their. It's just,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
come
that's
on.
that's one thing too. Yeah. So one last point that I'll support Teddy on in terms of this whole perspective, because I find Hugh Ferry, Colin Berry, a lot of Shroud skeptics will only focus on the body images. And look, I think Colin Berry's is the best artistic man. That definitely has a 15% probability to my mind. I would probably say between 10 to 20% is where it would be just on the body images. But once you factor in the blood stains and also the anatomical aspects and stuff, things become a lot more difficult. And I think that's why skeptics oftentimes, like Hugh Ferry in his latest experiments, will just neglect the bloodstains. And I'm saying, yeah, but how does your method interact with painting on the bloodstains? How do they work together? And that can cause
And
problems at
then
times.
there's the practical aspect. So, for example, with Colin Berry's hypothesis with the flour, FLOUR, uh, we're dealing with, I mean, he had a little bitty thing, a little bitty piece of linen. We're dealing with a nearly 14 foot by nearly 4 foot wide cloth and two full-size body images of a grown man. That's a lot of flour that would have to be used. And why would somebody have done that? Come on now. But anyway, let's just say somebody did. Can you imagine how good the hand washing would have to be on a 14 foot on nearly 14-foot cloth so that you don't see cementation from the flour, the slurry that he talks about, where it's just all gone. Heck, our modern washing machines don't clean stuff that well. And for small things and hand washing a 14-foot cloth is going to get rid of all of that cementation. It's like, it just gets silly. It just gets silly. Again, they're just magical doubters. And because they don't want it to be true. And so they're grasping at straws, coming up with whatever they can because they understand the power that comes in knowing what the Shroud of Turin is and what it means. That means that God is real. And that means that all of those requirements, those commands that God gives us as to how we are supposed to live, that we're supposed to follow that. Well, most people don't want to follow that. And it's a heck of a lot easier to live your life the way you want to live it than to live according to how God wants you to live it and how God demands that you live it. And people would rather just be like the infant that's like, I don't see it, that's not true, that's not true, that's not true, and just pretend that something is not true so that they don't have to grapple with the reality of something as profound as, wow, there are a lot of things that we normally want to do that we shouldn't do and that are prohibited. And while God knows that we are all sinners, God expects us to really try, fail as we might and will, to try to live up to that standard, but they don't want to live up to that standard. They want freedom. Well, God will give them their freedom, but then they're going to pay for it.
Gotcha. Awesome.
So
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, great show. Just so the audience knows, the next week I will be posting up a debate on Eucharistic miracles. The skeptic, Kevin Non-Tradicath, and unfortunately, Dr. Franco Serafini, um, what's the word I'm looking? He's not doing it. So he debated somebody who knows Franco Serafini. He's from France. Matthew something. But anyways, I'm going to be posting up the debate show next week, along with a debate review that me and Kevin are going to be going over that debate and discussing the evidence for and against Eucharistic miracles, and why clearly they're false. Sorry, Protestantism is true. Just just joking, Teddy. But
does Serafini speak English?
no, he's Italian. He was going to be on with Massimo Paris as a translator. Um, Now he agreed to do it. but it's
You
been
just can't
months.
do a debate. You can't do a debate that way. You got to be able to speak the language.
Well, then, yeah, I would just say don't agree to do it then. Just
Yeah.
say no in the first
I
place.
think sometimes people feel put on the spot and then they just quickly agree to something and then they later realize this is not a good idea.
All right,
I think
fair.
it's hard. I think it's hard for people when they don't speak it's hard enough to in a debate to process everything, much less to have the language barrier and probably um just when you have a translator, it's not the same as when you're assessing things. It's just different. That's a challenge. That's hard. He should have never agreed to it.
Fair enough. All right. Well, yeah, that's next week. And um I might take a break from the supernatural skeptical stupidity syndromes and do that in the first week of July because I want another fan requested something. He's a new Christian, Mark. I don't know if he wants me to give his last name. I'll just call him Mark. But he's been greatly influenced by my work on the Shroud, but other things on my podcast. And he's a new Christian and he's kind of struggling with issues in the Old Testament. So he's asked me to kind of address some of those issues. And starting with Genesis chapter 6, what are the Nephilim? What are these sons of God that are having children with the daughters of men and creating giants? What is that about? So I'm gonna cover that topic and do my best to say what I think that is for Mark there. So that'll be the next solo show I do, just to make sure I'm being fair to everybody's fan requests. So yeah, take
Interesting.
care. Huh? Interesting.
Interesting. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's something I've never covered before and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting for me to figure out what my take is. So
You know what? The interesting thing is when you know what the shroud is and you know the New Testament, all of the other stuff, I mean, I'm not trying to say they're not important to know, but they're really not necessary to know. And that it really isn't necessary. What's necessary is to know that God is real, to know that know what God expects of us, and to try our best to conform to that. That's the most important thing to focus on. And whether Nephilim or angels or whatever were making babies with people on Earth, who cares? I mean, I don't care. I
yeah,
just
sure. I'm different. So I
I mean,
agree with
it's
you. It's
interesting.
not.
It'll be interesting, but I mean, it's not something that keeps me up at night. It's not something that
Oh yeah, yeah.
I
No.
don't. It's just some people are just looking for stuff to get bogged down in, and
Well, I think
maybe I
everyone's.
need to
It's
put
it.
that
Look,
under
it's
a therapy session too of mine.
yeah, look, I agree with you. It's not necessary for the purpose of salvation or
It
justification,
is
but it
interesting.
is. Look,
It is.
all of God's word is inspired and it's
Yeah.
edifying for our sanctification. So I find the Old Testament very fascinating. I'm fascinated with things like biblical archaeology, for example, and stuff like that. So yeah, to each his own. Some Christians aren't into the shroud. That's okay. It's not necessary. You don't have to be. Actually I would say it's necessary for.
But I think that one can have a far greater confidence that God is real if you understand what the shroud is. I just don't. I mean, I
I
learned
take
that
that.
when I was
Yeah.
15, and I know I learned a lot of apologetics arguments. Cliff Connectley, who is on YouTube still, but he used to go to the universities, and he'd go to each university like for a week, Monday through Friday, and spend all day and he'd have a huge crowd there at the University of Texas, my alma mater, and so I learned a ton early on, from the age of 17 and a half when I got into college, and apologetics argument, and that's super important too. But even the best apologetical arguments will not take you as far in your confidence level as knowing the shroud evidence on top of everything else. So
Fair enough. Yeah, I
Maybe
take it back. I think it's all necessary. Look, all of God's word is necessary. It's studying it for our sanctification. So I take it back. Nothing's optional. We are to do our best to learn and grow and learn about God from Genesis to Revelation. It's all divine revelation. So I changed my mind on that. If we're going to be good apologists, we need to be able to answer questions about Nephilim. If a skeptic has a question about Nephilim, let's look into it. Let's
okay,
answer
okay. And it's interesting. But I'm just it's
it.
not.
It's not your cup of tea, but yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
But
All right.
I'll be curious as to what you say, what you find out.
Yeah,
So,
fair enough. All right, cool. So I will click the big button and
all right, great talking to you, Dale.
all right, thanks, Teddy.